I'm sure it's illegal, but what about like not just supplementation, but like
steroids?
Like, you know what I mean? Like pumping your boys up.
Just be no necks walking around.
Yeah. HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Deer Grow.
Man, we've been using Deer Grow products for a long time. The Plot Start and Plot Boost, more recently Plot Till. Now we've got 3 new liquid fertilizers that have been put in the mix that will cover everything we could want for a food plot program.
It's huge, man. The more food plotting we do, it's like, man, the liquids just make sense. Like whether it's herbicides or the Plot Start and Plot Boost, and now the fertilizers getting mixed in. It's like, man, I can combine all of those in certain cases and do less passes for more results.
I mean, it's all about efficiency. I mean, like you said, less passes. If you're out there treating your beans with glyphosate in the summertime, you can mix in this fertilizer, do that all at once. You have the boost in there that helps the metabolism. It's all about efficiency when we're talking about food plots. And really the big difference on these liquid fertilizers is you're bypassing some of these soil limitations, pH limitations, the soil type. In a lot of cases, we talk about dry fertilizers only being available for 17% of what you put down in the first year. These liquid fertilizers straight into the plant are 90% available in the first year. Huge difference in what you're going to see in growth.
It's huge. And so right now you can use code HUNTR15 for 15% off any of the Deer Grow products on their website. And as always,
better food plots, bigger deer. And we're back.
Ew.
HUNTR Podcast, episode 185, as Nick continues to keep us in line.
Yeah, buddy.
Still May the 23rd. If you're listening to last week's, now this week, same day.
Did you put a hoodie on too? Or did you have that on this whole time?
I've had this on, yeah.
Yeah, it was a little chilled towards the end of last. I got my toes exposed.
I'm
I get these new.
Surprised you're not having the fan on.
Just airflow.
I
you know
prepared.
What? Can we get a little bit of fan action there, Nick?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I put the hoodie on and got a little coffee here going.
Trying to embrace the November that's not here.
Ooh, it could be though.
Yeah.
Pretty soon.
Could be.
So, well, hey, wherever you guys are listening to us from, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, we appreciate you guys being here. Give us a like, follow, or subscribe, whatever's appropriate for the channel. I'm pretty sure one of those will give you a notification for when these things drop. But we do new episodes. That's a little strong on a fan there, Nick. Maybe dial that back just to like half ski.
Jeez.
If you don't mind. And if you guys have written us on the website or Instagram and stuff, we do see those. There's a few of them backlogged there, so we try to get back to them. So thanks for your patience, and here we go. End of May. Well, you're listening to this. It's June, I guess. Holy cow! You're listening to this. It is June.
Yep.
I didn't get to mention it on the last one, but we've been like we're getting some stuff in the ground. So I planted my corn. We'll save it for another one. But I broadcast 3 acres of corn.
It's a lot.
Well, it's a lot, and it's also a questionable strategy.
But Jed has done it for a long time.
Yeah, guys have done it. I just I never have.
Mm-hmm.
I've broadcast and had success with beans. But I think it's a little bit different of a beast. I think corn kind of talks to itself, itself, and so you got to have the right. It's like brassicas in that you don't want to overseed it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 50 acres per 3. 50 pounds per 3 acres.
Yeah, for the one that you were using.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And dude, I'm nice with a bag seeder. What I did there was I poured half the bag in there. I took exactly half the bag. I did an acre and a half. I did half a bag. I did an acre and a half, and it was like to a T. It's perfect.
Yeah, it felt
you learn over the years. You get nice with that.
Mm-hmm.
Just the weight, the feel, like where you need to be at. It's all trigger. I'm not setting a number.
No.
It's all trigger.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. That's an acquired skill.
Come home and you're icing her down. You're like, ooh. She's been going at it, Yeah, it's the old shoulder after cranking that thing.
Yeah. Sucks working on walking on soft dirt too after you disc it, and then it's tough.
Yeah, I'm gonna go look at by now, if they're listening, I've already hopefully put everything in, but I'll see what Kentucky's looking like. But the next 2 weeks are going to be rapid fire on the farms here to get everything in the ground. So
yeah, dude, I'm drilling beans on either tomorrow or Saturday, and then I think I'm driving back out to Illinois to respray and get all of our switch and maybe our beans in, and then I got to come back and plant all of our switch here in Ohio.
A lot of stuff, never ending, But it's June
fun.
If you're listening to this.
Yeah,
crazy. So kind of take a step back in time. I don't know how many podcasts ago, but we had a pretty at-length conversation with Lee Lukoski of going through, his thoughts around feeding on the properties, and then especially in the case of like the last summer, effects of EHD in the area, and kind of what him and some of the other guys have been seeing by feeding. They think that they're dramatically reducing a lot of the EHD, at least deaths, right? I don't know if they're contracting it and making it through. We'll find out today in their area, and Lee stands by it.
Last year was a tough one. I mean, I don't know how it stacks up against like what were the years? 2012
was a big one.
2004, 2007. I don't know. There's been a handful of years where it's like they were memorable as far as the amount of die off from EHD. And so I don't know if last year was quite one of those years, but it definitely hit some places in Iowa.
Torched them
really hard, like zone 6 for sure. Some areas in zone 4, and run down the list, people were impacted for sure. And I know a lot of that was in Lee's area.
Yep.
And also Skip's, Duncan's, a lot of those guys that we know out there, and everybody, it sounded like kind of had a different approach. Skip's like garlic, and all this other stuff. And Lee is, I think the only preventative measure he's taking is the analogics, stuff that he's feeding. And he had a bunch of neighbors with like 80% die off, like a very, very significant impact. And, per his perception was that he had very few deer die, especially the ones that were at his feeders regularly, consuming it. And so as we got into talking about that, we learned that Analogics' parent company was heavily involved in cattle nutrition and addressing like the mad cow disease, and I'm sure other diseases that we don't even know about. And so while I don't think they're making the claim like Analogics prevents EHD, it certainly seems like there's a case to be made for that. And so that kind of led to a conversation we're going to have today with Aaron Gaines, who is, I don't know his title, but I'm going to say like a head deer nutritionist or something of the like for Analogics.
If it wasn't, it is now.
Yep. And I think he is, I could be wrong, but was involved also with on the cattle side of things too. So kind of can speak to the history on that. But
yeah, and Aaron's we were just talking, he's a Northeast Missouri guy. So he's been in that epicenter of EHD over multiple years of outbreaks there, as well as CWD and where he's at. So yeah, cool discussion to really get into and understand, because I think a lot of people, when we talk about, put baiting aside, like baiting being related to the actual hunting over the bait from a harvest, the feeding, the supplemental feeding side, if you're in Texas, it's kind of like a given, right? You just do it. But I think in a lot of other states where it's legal, people aren't sure, right? It's like, well, maybe it's expensive. Like, what are the actual values I'm getting? Can they get that from the natural forage? Can they get that from the food plots I'm planting?
Well, they can't. I can guarantee that. This is even an interesting way to look at it, because to further drive your point of like baiting versus feeding, the only reason that I don't feed is because baiting is legal, because of the financial element. I can't justify feeding deer that are gonna die.
That's a good point.
Whereas if baiting was not allowed, I would have more confidence that they would live, and I would be more likely to invest in feeding them. And I got to believe that's probably the case for a lot of people. So.
Interesting. Well, let's bring in Aaron. All right. We got you, Aaron?
Yep, I'm on. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm sure we butchered a lot of that initial. We typically do.
I think we nailed it.
I got a new title.
Head deer nutritionist?
Yeah.
That's what Lee said.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Hey, close enough.
So Aaron, let's start there. What is your actual title there?
Yeah, so I'm responsible for the nutrition. I've got a PhD in nutrition, so went to the University of Missouri for my bachelor's, master's, and PhD in animal nutrition. So spent a lot of time in Columbia, as we talked earlier. Been in the feed industry for 20 plus years, and been working in the outdoor industry since 2012. And really what got me in the outdoor industry was the EHD virus. My background in nutrition side was on nutrition and health interactions, did a lot of work trying to study those two interactions. And being in the livestock industry, we deal with a lot of health issues, and being able to take nutrition technologies to address health problems in livestock has kind of been our specialty over the last 20 years. And so being able to leverage some of that knowledge, and being an avid deer hunter, when we had the outbreak in 2012 here in the Midwest, we had EHD virus, strain 1, 2, and 6. It was very devastating. Frankly, sitting in a deer stand that fall, very frustrated with some of the losses we had, kind of kicked me in gear and two of my business partners to kind of start thinking down the path of how do we innovate and bring technologies to the outdoor industry. And at that time, we were not working with analogics. Analogics was going down a parallel path. Mark Freeze and his dad Wayne's a veterinarian. They had several animal health companies, and Wayne actually started his first vaccine company in the early 70s. He built that and sold it. His non-compete was up. He started another vaccine company, built that one up, flipped it in the late 80s. And then when he started up Newport Laboratories, which some of your listeners will probably be familiar with Newport Laboratories.
Yeah, I know Newport.
Yeah. So if they know livestock, they're going to know that name. Newport, under Wayne's guidance, they were the first to develop an autogenous EHD vaccine.
Yep.
So analogics has been, basic in EHD since, they started the vaccine company. And subsequent to the vaccine company, they're doing a lot of work with essential oil technologies, and essential oils, have a GRAS status, so they're generally recognized as safe to be used in animal feed. Of course, we use them in human products as well, but some of those essential oils are very unique in terms of their antibacterial, antiviral, and antifungal properties. And so they did a lot of work in their laboratories understanding which essential oils could be leveraged to address EHD. And so back, I guess 4 or 5 years ago, got into conversation with Mark Freeze, and our group joined forces with Analogics to further develop new products for the outdoor industry. And that's what kind of landed us here. So like I said, been working with them the last 4 or 5 years, worked with Lee for about the last decade, honestly, working with him on his nutrition and feeding program. And so that's been a good relationship. Got to become friends with him and Tiffany, and just really neat people. And as you guys know, I listened to your guys' last podcast with Lee. I think it was like almost 3 hours. So the dude is like the Rain Man of deer hunting. I mean, it's crazy. He loves talking deer, and yeah, it's hard to get him off the phone when you start going down the path of talking deer. And EHD's been, obviously you guys said it, close to him, being there in Southeast Iowa, and he's been very committed when it comes to trying new technologies and supplemental feeding. I don't know anybody that takes it to the extreme that Lee does.
Sure.
I think we could all, looking at what we talked about, Jared. I mean, the investment he makes in supplemental feeding, it's absolutely crazy. But he's got the results over time and proven that it's working, not only in terms of quality of the deer herd, but also the health of the deer herd.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you heard me say it there kind of in the intro, like that. It's an interesting way to look at it. It's like, not that I'm like heavily like I'm on the cusp of a feeding program, but like if you were to ask me, why aren't you? And I'm like, no, the number one is expense. But if the reciprocal was, well, there's a good chance they're going to survive, and the investment you're making is likely to yield a return, then it's not, we're on the board now.
Well, so I was going to ask Aaron, like, obviously we'll end up circling back here, I'm sure, to the EHD stuff to really dive in, but let's start from a basis standpoint. Because obviously people see, whatever Purina out there or Record Rack or whatever it is, just from a feed standpoint. I mean, and anybody that's been in the farming side of things understands like all the cattle, sweet feed, all the things that are available. But educate us a little bit from a deer side of like what does a feeding program look like, and what are we addressing there from a nutritional side?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about supplemental feeding programs, and really all we're doing there is trying to increase the carrying capacity, of our land based on the resources that are available. And depending on your size of your deer herd, you may or may not have enough nutrition resources available. And to your question, there's a lot of reputable feed companies out there that have nutritionists on staff that understand the requirements of the deer and what they need at various times of the year. And our approach, has been frankly, understanding what those deer need at various times throughout the year. And so like Lee's feeding program, it's a phased feeding program, very similar to how we do livestock feeding, particularly how we feed pigs. We feed to the animal's requirement based on what they need at that particular time. So, for him, we've got 3 different rations that change throughout the year. Obviously, during hunting season, he's not feeding, but when he comes out of hunting season, coming off the rut and does are bred, we start trying to recover body reserves there. And so that program is going to be high energy. And as we advance toward the spring months, when bucks start, growing antlers again and does are starting to fawn, protein levels start to ramp up. And so that program changes based on what that deer needs at different times. So that would be something that's probably a little unique in terms of how we feed, wild deer, maybe compared to other companies just feeding a standard 16 or 18% protein diet.
Yeah. And then, I would assume kind of if those are like the macro level, focuses that you have, then from like a micronutrient inside, there's certain things that you all are looking at that are having a benefit either to growth, health, immune system, whatever throughout the year as well.
Yeah. So, Analogic's approach has been, it's a health-based company first and foremost, and we leverage, nutrition technologies that support health. So I talked about earlier, the essential oil technologies. I would probably challenge other companies. I don't think they have near the science that we have on those technologies. Same way on probiotics. We've worked with a company on a very whitetail specific probiotic. A lot of feed companies can say they have a probiotic, but we actually have taken isolates from deer and have submitted those to a laboratory we work with and screened those isolates. And we've taken those isolates and screened for different bacillus organisms, which are your probiotics, trying to understand which bacillus organisms can help prevent or that would have antimicrobial activity against like Clostridium, E. coli. Another one that we've tackled as of late is Fusobacterium. The reason for tackling Fusobacterium is it's typically associated with EHD virus. So a lot of deer that died of EHD virus and in captivity also have Fusobacterium. So one of our approaches is if attacking this EHD thing, a lot of times there's other comorbidities present if it's going to be fatal to the deer, no different than COVID. So if we can knock down E. coli, if we can knock down Clostridium, if we can knock out Fusobacterium, we give that deer a better chance of surviving if they get infected with EHD virus.
What are, Aaron, can I ask, what are the other prevailing like comorbidities? I'd never heard that before.
Well, pneumonia is very, prominent.
Yeah, I was going to say that's probably the one I've heard the most of.
Yeah. Bacterial pneumonias is very, very prominent. The pathogens I mentioned earlier on Clostridium and E. coli, those are enteric pathogens, bacterial in nature. The other thing that, I don't know if Lee talked a whole lot about it, but, ticks. Ticks is another thing that we tackle with his feeding program, try to reduce the amount of tick infestation on his deer. And I mean, same way with livestock, right? Ticks and flying insects are very detrimental to performance, right? The animals got to deal with them. I mean, you think about, you drive by a pasture and you see cows out there swatting flies all the time. That is costly from an energy standpoint. So you think about that on the deer side. If a buck is constantly trying to get rid of flies, he's diverting energy from antler growth to keeping flies off himself. And same way with ticks, you got a high tick load that's pulling down the deer. Same way with parasites that are in deer. In livestock we can deworm. In deer we can deworm as well. I mean, there's some products that we can use to deworm wild deer through a supplemental feeding program and take some of that internal parasite load off the deer. And if you can do that, that directs more nutrients toward, whether it's the doe nursing fawns or the buck trying to go grow antlers.
It is funny. So many of our conversations and like what you hear on TV shows and other stuff, it's like, what are the necessities of deer? It's like, food, cover, water. And then we invest our entire, off season and stuff trying to improve on those things, trying to give deer what deer need. But when you get down to like the individual biological level, it's like they need to be healthy. Like there's things that need to be addressed. And the ticks are a huge one. I mean, I don't know technically, maybe you can tell us if deer get Lyme disease or not. I'd imagine as a wild animal, they're more, what's the word? able to manage that sort of a disease. It's just like they live in the wild, so they're going to get ticks. They have it. But run down the line there of things that you mentioned, there are parasites and stuff. It's like it makes perfect sense that we would want to try to address those things so that the habitat improvements that we're making are, even able to have an impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I call, food, water, and habitat, that's your triad of resources that the deer need. But, if you can't keep them healthy, it's all for naught. And, that's been our focus, is trying to keep these deer healthy and productive. And, I use the mossy oak term a lot anymore. It's, we're gamekeepers. We spend a lot of our time in the off season managing the wild deer herd, and it's crazy. Most people would think we're nuts on what we spend on food plots and mineral and supplemental feeding, and it's all an effort. It's not really about harvesting the deer. It's really just taking care of the resource, for years to come, whether that's for us to enjoy personally or for our kids or our grandkids to enjoy at some point. I mean, that's how I think about it for my own farms.
So, when we start to look at that, Aaron, from let's say from a feeding standpoint, obviously, and it depends on kind of the habitat you're in, but, that deer is consuming a lot of other things, from bed to feeder, back to crop field through food plot, et cetera. As you start to look at that overall, and again, you said it out of the gate, supplemental feed program, but is there a focus or a goal in mind when we're talking about these different bacteria or things that we're trying to essentially solve for, restrict, to have that deer consume from a supplemental feed level?
Yeah, you're just talking about overall intake.
Yeah, just overall intake in the average, like, a deer in a day of a deer of what it eats. What is that average intake? Like, what would that goal be, to try to get him to intake from that side of it?
Yeah, you're hitting on one of the big challenges with wild deer compared to captive deer.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
In a pen raised deer, that's very, very predictive.
Yep.
Because most of their nutrition is provided through the feed.
Mm-hmm.
In the wild deer population, they're eating everything, right? Browse to supplemental feeding to mineral.
Yep.
And so we think about that kind of, trying to maximize intake through a combination of resources, whether it's supplemental feeding, whether it's mineral, whether it's protein blocks, but trying to provide delivery of those nutrients through multiple delivery mechanisms. And now even the water, we're starting to look at water technologies to get, these nutrients into these deer, not only minerals, but also, probiotics. And so, on supplemental feeding, a lot of times, I get up to about 1.5 pounds per deer, at different times of the year. Depends on what else is available. Like now during spring green up, they start backing off my feeders.
Right.
There's other things available. But in the winter months, I mean, it's like clockwork, when we're coming out of, harvest, crop harvest, because that's one of the things that's changed, I've noticed over, my time hunting over the years, is the technology on the farming side. The harvest technology has gotten so much better. And it used to be that, combine would pass through, there was crops scattered all over the field.
Yeah.
And the deer would have a lot of, resources. And now with today's technology, go out after a combine's went through a bean or a cornfield, there's not much there.
No.
unless the combine operator just completely hosed it up. Yeah. But I mean, the equipment is just really good. And so that's forced us to look at food plot programs and supplemental feeding differently than what we've done in the past to make sure those resources are available. But I would say that, that is probably our biggest challenge, is making sure we can get a consistent intake of those nutrients. Daily is preferred, right? No different than taking our daily vitamins, but that doesn't happen in the wild deer population. They don't always go to a feeder every single day or to a mineral lick, but we want to offer multiple ways to get that, whether it's water, whether it's through a feeder, whether it's through a mineral lick or a protein block, but trying to deliver those nutrients in multiple ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think when obviously we talk about like the pen side of things, and it's kind of the most controlled setting that you have, and those deer, it's basically 100% of their diet is coming from that.
Well, you
that
can remove everything
feed.
else.
So yeah, it's gone.
There's a fence, there's like a tree, and there's nothing else.
Yeah,
there's a feeder.
Yeah, and I think that we kind of talk about this on the feeding or bait side, however you want to look at it, and it's it's no different than anything else we do. It's a consistency thing, right? And so, I think what happens in a lot of cases is guys will go out there, and it's probably tied to expense and or time, and they'll fill up a feeder, and then it'll run out, and for the next week and a half, there's nothing in the feeder until they can come back and they can refeed it. And I would assume that in those situations, the deer's intake of that is probably dramatically less because, it realizes like it's not a consistent source that it can continue to go back to day after day.
Yeah. Yeah, it becomes more like a treat, more or less.
Yeah.
When it's offered. Yeah. Yeah, we're getting, captive pens were 3.5 pounds per day in a captive facility. And like I mentioned, in the wild, we're lucky to get 1.5 pounds out of a feeder, when they're at peak intake. Depends on what other resources are available. On the supplemental feeding side, I used to do what Lee did. I'd feed pretty much all year long, depending on what I had as far as on my farms that I wanted to keep on my farms where they weren't going somewhere else. But anymore, I'm balancing cost as well as management. And so supplemental feeding has really evolved for me from going pretty much all year long to pretty much as soon as season wraps up. Here in Missouri, it's January 15th. We turn feeders on and we'll run those pretty much all the way up to spring green up. So like now we're late on getting crops in right now. I mean, there's we got a lot of forage right now available. And so I've backed off feeding on a couple of my farms already. So I'm really feeding 3 to 4 months out of the year in terms of that supplemental feeding program versus, Lee, he's doing a lot longer, and perhaps I'm doing it wrong because the quality of his deer, it didn't happen overnight. Yeah.
Sure.
When we started working with Lee, I mean, the program has over time proven itself out. The longer he's done it, it's proven out in terms of quality and health of his herd. But I just done it from a cost standpoint. It just gets pretty cost prohibitive by the time I do food plots and buy farms and try to feed all the deer in the county. So
I can't imagine there's that many guys. I mean, Lee is, if you're going to compare like feed bills across like all, every deer hunter in the country, he's probably number one, right? Or right up in there. Well,
I'll guarantee it.
Well, and maybe I'm not giving enough. I know there's like in Texas, some places where it really is the culture that's happening. But if you come to, any of these other Midwestern states, it's just like I don't know anybody that's running a consistent feed program.
So again, I mean, obviously, if resources, money-wise, were not an issue, I'd run it year-round. Like I wouldn't even think twice about it. especially if I had somebody to actually feed them.
I know guys that are running bait programs, and so that basically looks like.
That's
at a maximum, they're spending, $5,000 for corn, which is, a reasonable bill for an annual thing. And that's yielding, where are they getting with that? 20,000 pounds of corn, 30,000 pounds of corn, but they're running there's no nutrition
purely
value.
Attraction.
It's just purely an attraction, and they're running it just during a very targeted, part of the year.
So, I mean, with all, I guess that in mind, Aaron, and kind of look at the plethora of like, I'm trying to manage a property. I'm trying to keep these deer healthy. Like if it's like, when is the best time to do a supplemental feed program if I have to be selective on a time frame standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, back to kind of the purpose, it's really increase the carrying capacity of your ground. And so you want a supplemental feed when resources are limited, which is going to be in the winter months, cold winter months, when they have less, obviously less forage availability, and they're dependent heavily on browse at that point and limited crop residues. And so if your food plot, that's the other thing that's got to play in here too, is your food plot program. And that's always a question: how many food plots should I do as far as acreage? How much should I do? Is it enough to get me through those winter months? And if it's not going to be enough, that's where you got to do supplemental feeding. Or let's say you had a fall food plot program that failed, right? Last year we had dry weather in the fall and our food plots were not that great. And so in that situation, our forage availability was a lot less. And so we had to feed more feed last year. So every year is a little different, but in the winter months is when I recommend the supplemental feeding program. I mean, to me, that's table stakes to get you to spring green up.
Yep.
And if you want to go the distance like Lee, then you feed it, throughout the summer months. And I've done that. I mean, the deer that you guys saw back in my conference room, I mean, I killed that a couple years ago. That deer, I wanted to keep him on my farm. I didn't want him going anywhere else. And he was used to that feeder. And I did not want to disrupt anything on that farm. And so it played out. I mean, I don't know if it would have mattered if I supplemental fed or not all summer, but I wasn't going to take the chance.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting to hear you say that the main reason you do it is to increase carrying capacity. I wouldn't have necessarily guessed that was the case. I would have thought that in most cases, because I like to think we're doing it on some of our farms, is that we can sustain our carrying capacity. If anything, it's limited by other things like cover would be the other one. Yeah. I would have said that a feeding program would be more to stack the antler potential. I wouldn't think it's going to necessarily. I mean, I see how it could certainly during those times of the year if there is no other food. But if you have the food via things like, mainly food plots for leftover ag and stuff, it would be to, generationally from year to year, build nutrition into a herd that allows them to stack, crazy antler potential.
No, you're right on that. I mean, it does benefit that, but I think you go back to the general premise behind supplemental feeding, you're increasing the resource capacity, which, to your point, spills over in terms of improving antler growth, generationally. I mean, that work's been done over time. And that's always a question, you get, is there any research to support supplemental feeding? I've dug into the literature. I mean, there are some good studies on the benefits of supplemental feeding as it relates to antler growth, improving that fawn to doe ratio, improving fawn crop production. I know Bronson Strickland has done some work there at Mississippi State Deer Lab on the generational effects of nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting when you go through that work.
That was Emily's master's.
Yeah.
Wasn't
Have you guys had them on yet?
Yeah. So
Bronson?
my wife and I went to Mississippi State for our master's. Okay. And her project was the generational effect of age, nutrition, genetics on the deer down there. And it's hard to comprehend because most people aren't used to seeing like, if you're from Missouri or Iowa or Ohio, like you don't comprehend like how different deer are across the state because they're really not that different, right? In Missouri a little bit to where you're at versus the Ozarks, right? But when you move down south and you get into a state like Mississippi, you've got deer in the Delta that look like they're from Iowa. Then you've got deer on the lower coastal plain that look like they're from Florida, right? And so it's the project's essentially ability, and this is taking wild deer at first and putting the captive. So it was kind of trying to blend the ability to bring wild deer into a captive setting. So you had kind of wild deer on these, secure aging structures, secure feeding programs. But the reality is it's not just because I feed this year heavily doesn't mean next year that deer's body weight's going to blow through the roof or that deer's antler size is going to blow through the roof. It's literally taking a full generation, often to see those changes. So for the research we did see some improvements, right? Some of the coastal deer did have better antlers than they probably would have if they weren't on good nutrition, and similar to what we saw in the Delta. But it was a full generation before we saw those coastal deer putting on the same body weights and the same antler sizes as the Delta deer were.
Help me make the connection there, because like when you say generational, I think genetic, and nutrition is not a genetic component.
But there are a lot of components that are, the structure, bone structure being one of them, right? Like a deer's bone structure, if it has large bones, it has the ability to put more muscle, more mass on heavier deer, right? Versus the small. So, just because we fed a coastal deer a ton of the best food, it couldn't just put on weight because it didn't have the structure for it, didn't have the bone structure for it. So generationally, it takes time for that to say.
Wait a minute, I can't get there quite yet, because you can't just like let's take apply. Help me make this connected to a person. Like, you can feed somebody superior nutrition and inferior nutrition, and the superior nutrition is he's gonna put on weight. And maybe his bones grow as part of that.
It won't that much. That's
not that much. Yeah, I mean, you can only do so much. Just because he was well fed and grew slightly bigger bones and has nothing to do with what his offspring is going to do.
Well, it does. There's an evolution there.
I don't think so.
Absolutely.
Aaron,
I'm gonna side with Jeremy on this one.
Okay.
based on the Mississippi State data, I mean, it's an epigenetic effect is what they call it. So basically over time, there was no difference in genetic variability across those three regions, correct?
Correct.
Meaning
That's
what they learned from
on the
that study.
baseline. There was no genetic difference between deer from the Delta and deer from the coast. They were the exact same genetic type deer.
Okay.
Okay. Got it, Aaron.
But what ended up happening over time when you provided adequate nutrition resources, particularly for the animals that come from regions that had lower quality nutritional resources, over time, those animals' antler size and body weights started to catch up with the deer from like the Delta region. And so you look at and it took 2 generations, I believe, to get those
there.
deer caught up.
Yep.
But basically what's happening is that the genetic potential was there, but it was not being exploited because the resources were not present in that environment. But over time, that expression is able to be captured when those resources are provided to that animal.
They call it phenotypic expression, basically. Is like they have the potential. Like a deer in the coast could have the potential to be 250 pounds and 150 inches at 5 years old.
Right.
But the environment won't let it. And over many generations of that environmental
I think that's where you're
suppression,
losing me is why does it have to happen over multiple? And
because your bones don't grow and shrink, over time.
Let me roll some things out. Go ahead.
Like a genetic by environment interaction is what it is, right? The genes are present, but some of those genes are not turned on for that animal to express their full genetic potential. It's almost Mother Nature's way of protecting that animal, right? If the nutrition resources are not there, why try to divert more nutrients toward antler growth? Because
so you're saying nutrition could influence genetic potential over generations.
It does.
Wow.
Does, yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's not changing It's not changing the genetics. When people talk about we're going to change
it's allowing
the genetics,
for existing genetics to manifest.
show their full potential.
Okay.
Yeah, I almost think of it like a light switch, right? The lights, the lights are there, but nobody's turned the light switch on because the electricity is not there to run the light bulb. But once the resource is there, the switch gets turned on, and now you have light. Same way with the same concept here with what they found in that Mississippi State study, that there was no difference in the genetics of those deer across those regions. But once those animals were starting to be provided the nutrition resources, some of those genes got turned on, and so they could start demonstrating that phenotypic expression of antler size and body weight similar to the region where there were adequate resources, which was the Delta region.
And how it got started was
that's super cool.
Hunters of the state of Mississippi that were down south in the coastal plain basically said, we want you to bring us Delta deer. Like, we got these little scrawny deer that don't do anything. Bring us Delta deer, stock them down here, and we'll have big deer. Well, the reality is there was no genetic difference, but we had to prove that. So we gave them the same food. We let them age the same way. We put them in the same environment, which was startful.
Had the opposite ever been done? Like, if you brought Delta deer down and let them just exist in that environment, if they would shrink?
I don't know.
I don't know, but I would think it would work the same way, the opposite direction.
I don't think they can shrink their skeletal structure, though. Like, you can cripple like yourself as you get older, right? But I don't think
over generations it can. If those genome can be shut off.
Oh, sure.
So
like over generations, because it's going to adapt itself.
It's the exact same in reverse order.
Yeah, it's just the same.
Well, that's super interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I think the parallel to that gives us at least some evidence of that is you look at, obviously the Midwest, everybody wants to come hunt the Midwest. Iowa's got, land of giants. But you look in the Southeast where there's been adoption of supplemental feeding programs over time, the hunters and land managers in the Southeast are growing some really good deer.
Yeah, giants.
Some giants. And
so, well, and it's in the keep. It's supplemental.
I didn't know that.
It has.
I thought they were growing forkhorns.
No, it's got to still be in good soil, right? Because they're gonna eat other things, right? But if you look like the Black Belt region of Alabama and stuff, you go over to the Mississippi and Louisiana Delta. I mean, you're talking.
They're growing Midwest type deer.
They're growing 275-pound, 200-inch deer.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Wow.
And you talk to a lot of those guys and what they're doing different. They're providing resources to the deer, and it's not happening overnight. And that's the thing that if people are listening to this podcast about supplemental feeding and they decide to supplemental feed this year and they don't see the results, not going to be surprised.
Yeah.
But they better stick with it, because it takes time
Exactly.
for the nutrition to, if you will, kick in, you know, to upregulate some of those genes so you can get full expression of that genetic potential of that animal. And so, you know, if you're going to do supplemental feeding, you got to be all in and say, hey, I'm going to stick with it for, you know, 5 years and take some measurements over time, right? Measure harvest over time. And with trail camera technology now, I mean, I expect you're going to see the difference. I mean, you guys talked to Lee. I mean, Lee would not be doing supplemental feeding if he didn't think it worked. I mean, he's spending way too much money.
Well, literally what he said, if you listen to that podcast, was I'll mess the years up or whatever, but he's like, the first 10 years or whatever that I was in Iowa, he's like, I killed one 200-inch buck and I knew of one other one. And then like in the last 7 years, he's killed 6 of them. And he's like, the only thing that I've changed was I started feeding the analogics. And I don't know how closely tied his success there was to his initiation of starting to feed. I mean, there's environmental factors too. I mean, I guess that's kind of where I was going, was like, so that's, like I said, it's super interesting about the genetic portion of that and how those things get turned on over generations and stuff. But there also is probably like a real time effect, positive consequence that's happening from just having the nutrition.
For sure.
Like, you know, for instance, not that it necessarily, I don't think has anything specific exactly or directly to do with like when fawns are dropped necessarily, but maybe that has more to do with ratio and breeding and stuff. But it does have from the get-go, they've got the right nutrition. Their mothers had the right nutrition. They've got the right stuff in their milk, basically, all the way through.
Yeah. I always say it's the inside out kind of policy. Like if you would start a supplemental feed program like right now, potentially could help antler size this year, potentially. But the reality is that deer is going to put on like more kidney fat in terms of a kidney fat index. It's going to have more fat on it. You know, that's where Aaron's talking about these phases. I think of a feeding for energy phase, protein phase, etc. You're creating a healthier animal from the inside, really. Does that mean that your weights are going to dramatically increase after a year? Probably not. But like if you did maybe your kidney fat indexes, or we've all done it, like skin a deer after the rut and it's like, there ain't an ounce of fat on this thing. Those are the types of things that I think you can improve within a given year. Like a great year last year. I know, and Aaron, you probably did too. We had a ton of acorns, right? Most of the deer that I skinned last year just stacked with fat. I mean, just blocks of it. Year before with no acorns, barren. I mean, I had concerns about that deer. So within a given year, that can fluctuate. But but the skeletal structure can't. Right. It can't fluctuate within those given years.
Well, and I think that it's hard. It's not a conversation that happens as frequently because in the areas where most guys hunt, nutrition is not the limiting factor. Age is, you know, in terms of like if you're looking for, and so it makes sense that the conversation should happen in that order, right?
Yep. Yeah, and I mean,
that's what I'm saying.
You hear a lot of guys, I won't say uneducated, but you hear a lot of guys jump immediately to genetics. They're like, well, the genetics aren't good.
That's the very last
We just had Mike Tonkovich on from Ohio, and he's like, listen, we got Pennsylvania, we got Wisconsin, we got Michigan. Like, all these deer had crossed over the political state lines, and they're just, you know, our deer test from Michigan the same as they do in Ohio, so in Pennsylvania. So it's not like, well, I got Michigan deer. Well, those are the same deer in Ohio.
Right.
It comes down to the nutrition and the age.
Yeah. And so like in Ohio, we've got the nutrition. I know we do. That most places do. And we've got the genetics. If we had the age, we'd grow Iowa deer. If I had an analogics feeding program, I'd grow Likoski deer. That's the hierarchy. The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Hoyt.
What can we say, man? Another year back with Hoyt. We're both shooting RX8s. I'm shooting 70 pounds in the bourbon, which I love bourbon.
It's great.
And you're shooting 80 pounds in the straight black.
Blacked out as always, man. I got the, so I'm shooting the 500 grain Easton Arrow this year. And at 80 pounds, I'm flinging that thing at like 300 feet per second. I mean, it's deadly. Put a water buffalo in front of me and he's done.
I mean, we shot it earlier. You literally put an arrow through a brand new target, like never been shot before.
I know. So one other thing that Hoyt is doing this year is they're making all their own strings in-house. And so the quality is top notch, and it just really is something that is setting them apart from their competitors.
Well, what we always try to do when we go to our bow shop, Ultimate Outdoors, is we try to shoot other bows just to make sure that we are really giving everybody a fair chance.
Sure.
The reality is it's a no-brainer. Hoyt, it stands above all of them every single time.
Definitely. And so right now you can use code HUNTR, HUNTR, for 20% off any apparel on the Hoyt website. And as always,
get serious, get Hoyt. So I guess, Aaron, when let's break it down to that. Obviously, yes, the most dedicated you can be to that program over multiple seasons, the better. I mean, but I would assume that, like we said with the acorns and stuff, you guys are seeing some within 2 years, within 3 year type results, whether it's, body fats or maybe some body weights, maybe the appearance of antler size starting to have some impact there.
Yeah, it just doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
I mean, ideally, 5 year, these programs are generational. And so a lot of times supplemental feeding, we talk about, what we're doing to the buck, but we also got to think about the benefits for the doe.
Sure.
And that, right. There's a concept in livestock nutrition called basically prenatal programming, where whatever we feed the mother impacts the offspring. And the work at Mississippi State, demonstrated some of that with the epigenetic effects. So, I mean, supplemental feeding is one of those things. It's a tool in the toolbox. And I look at the people that want to try to influence genetics as hunters and land managers. We have no control over the genetics.
Mm-mm.
So do what's in your control. We can influence habitat.
Mm-hmm.
We can influence feeding program. We can influence water.
Yep.
Those three things are in our control.
Yeah.
But genetics is not. And so people that spend time on trying to manage a deer herd for genetics, good luck. I think I'm going to spend my time focusing on age structure, right? That's a big deal in the state I live in because our rifle season is right in the middle of the rut.
Smack dab.
And so we don't get the age structure on a lot of our deer. We could grow deer better than Iowa if we had, the ability to get those deer through the rut, through rifle season. But we don't get the age structure. And so that's where we got to try to, on our own properties, try to do everything we can to keep them on our properties.
Yeah.
And try to get that age structure. And then nutrition becomes a tool as well. Try to grow those deer.
You can influence herd dynamic though, in the sense that, right? Because if you have like
buck the doe.
No, well but I'm just saying if you have an 8-point that's 4 years old or older, that deer is likely dominant over a 2 or 3 year old, 10-point. And so maybe guys shoot that thinking they're influenced the genetics. You're not.
No.
But you can allow for that deer to stay there, be more comfortable if the older, more dominant, less antler potential buck is removed.
Yeah, it's the bully buck.
That's what we did last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, we went
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, go ahead, Aaron.
And the same thing on resource capacity, right? Making sure you're taking enough does off your property, because you only got so many resources, and that creates a lot of social stress. If you got too many deer on your property, it's pushing deer off.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Deer that you may not want to have pushed off. It may be your high quality bucks, as an example. And so I'm guilty of it. We don't kill enough does each year, and so that's going to start becoming more of a focus because we've got plenty of deer, but I just can't keep adding more and more food, to increase my resource capacity, because then I'm taking away from something else, i.e. habitat.
Yeah.
So it's making sure all that stays in balance.
That is a really interesting and almost impossible to prove dynamic or like situation there. I'll use my farm as the example. Like we had enough food last year. I mean, just based on my analysis, I planted a grain field, and that grain field lasted. There was grain on the field until March, when things started to green up. So I said, hey, there's enough food. We shot like 10 or 15 does off of like that general area. And we did that purely because in years past, we've lost bucks. I've noticed like bucks get to like 4 years old, and in some cases, like they'll leave. And I know that they're alive somewhere else. And I'm like, what's the deal? And, as we've had conversations over the years, I'm like ruling things out. I'm like, well, there's enough food. There's like, I've done everything I can do, or I am working on doing everything I can do from a cover standpoint. There's a bit of a limiting factor there, but it is what it is. The thing that's left is that herd dynamic. I'm like, boy, we have a lot of does just for the cover that's available. And it's my opinion that those does eventually will just take those over. Like there's summer food there and stuff. They'll take them over, and the bucks will leave. They just want to be more secluded. Whether they take them over or there's just more does there, and they're just like, I don't want to be around it.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it seems like, especially as you get into those older age classes, you might see 1 or 2 or 3 mature bucks kind of hanging out. But like other than that, they don't want to be around big groups, at least in the summertime. And then especially as you split up, like they for sure want to be isolated until they're ready to be with a doe. So, I think, Aaron, when you kind of look at that progression through the season, and let's even take now, this is dropping first week of June. Obviously people are thinking protein, right? They're thinking antler growth, body growth, thinking, providing protein to that doe so that the milk and the lactation and everything is going well. I mean, are there, like, I've always heard things about things like selenium or phosphorus and stuff. Like, what about some of these micronutrients, and like how are we looking at that from an effect potentially on these deer?
Yeah, good question. So we talk a lot about supplemental feeding, but mineral nutrition is important. Like right now in the spring, right, during spring green up, we see deer hitting mineral licks more, and a lot of times what's driving them to those mineral licks is sodium deficiency. So during spring green up, water content of that new growth is higher, and so is the potassium content, and that naturally causes a sodium deficiency. And so that's why you see deer seeking out, salt licks and mineral sources. Mineral products are going to have, a portion of that mineral being salt. Depends on the formulation, but let's say 35% salt. It helps with attraction, but also is there to cover the sodium needs of that animal. In analogics, we've one of the tools that we have available is we do a liver mineral analysis. We offer that out. So on harvested animals, you can submit liver samples to analogics, and then we'll basically send you a report card on the liver status of those animals. And the 4 minerals that we focus on based off that liver analysis is copper, manganese, zinc, and selenium. And it's interesting because you always get the question, well, does mineral supplementation really help? Right? We've all heard that question. Sure. And it's hard to do controlled studies in wild deer to determine if it helps or not. In captive deer, we provide them everything they need, so it's hard to show a mineral deficiency. But in the wild, there are situations where there are deficiencies in certain regions. And what we found on the liver analysis, it's kind of interesting, is we've been doing this for multiple years. And I pulled this data for a publication here recently, and compared to the lab reference value, we're sending these to a veterinary diagnostic lab. It's Iowa State University. And so they got reference values for those 4 minerals. And for copper, 23% of the samples we submitted were deficient for copper. Manganese, 58%. Zinc, 36%. Selenium, 25%. And so what we've been able to do with this data is we've had land managers that come to us, they send their liver analysis in, they're not doing a mineral program. We find that they've got, some minerals that are limiting. And we've done some before and afters in terms of before mineral supplementation, what was the baseline values, and then what happens after mineral supplementation. And we did that on a property that was fairly well controlled. And we were able, 3 of those, when we first started the mineral program, the livers coming back from that farm were deficient in copper, manganese, and zinc. Selenium was fine. But after mineral supplementation, we corrected that deficiency, and the liver samples, since they've been on a mineral program, have met that reference value for the lab, basically showing that we are now nutritionally adequate in those 3 minerals.
And I guess, Aaron, what, if you could just break it down for us on each, like what would be like an anatomic role of those nutrients?
Yeah. So copper, for example, it's important for fertility and the immune system. It's an enzyme cofactor. There's also some evidence it has a role in antler growth as well. And it's kind of surprising, but there's been some work done, Texas A&M showing that copper can play a role in antler growth, even though it's a micronutrient. A lot of times we think about calcium and phosphorus as being kind of the heavy hitters for antler growth, since hardened antlers, 20% calcium and roughly 10% phosphorus. But that's kind of unique to find a micronutrient like copper also influencing antler growth. Manganese, it's part of numerous enzyme systems. It's important for reproduction and fetal development. And then zinc, it plays a role in growth and health of the animal. It's also got an important part to play as it relates to protein and carbohydrate metabolism, along with immune system function. And then selenium is involved in various metabolic pathways, from growth to reproduction and herd health. So,
wow.
Yeah, these are, the four minerals that, we've put a lot of focus on because of the functionality and the importance to the animal. And we can measure them through that liver mineral analysis. So it becomes a really nice diagnostic tool for us to understand, where the deer herd is setting. And then once we understand that, depends on what that hunter or land manager can do in their particular state. For example, in Missouri, we have a CWD containment zone. So there's certain counties where they can't use mineral.
Right.
So in that situation, what we end up doing is we focus on food plots. And so food plots are a way that the animal can get mineral from those plants. And that really starts with getting a soil test, making sure that your soils contain the minerals that those plants need to grow. And if you do that, those plants will incorporate those minerals, and that's another way to deliver those minerals to the animals.
I would say Illinois is like a perfect case study of, you can't supplement mineral at all.
Yeah.
But it's got amazing soil in certain parts of the state, and the deer are obviously, about as big as they get.
Yeah. And you look at, and we've got some maps where we've pulled from like the USGS it's a National Geochemical Survey, and they've got mineral maps for the United States. And we pulled all those. And if you look at like copper, for example, copper, until you get up into Iowa and really north of Iowa, copper levels in Iowa and above are adequate or fairly high. But you get into the southeast, copper levels are pretty low. Manganese is pretty good in the Midwest. Again, you get in the southeast, soil manganese levels are lower. Selenium, kind of the same story. And then zinc, again, same story. So we can learn a lot just from soil maps of, what's going to be available to that plant, and then also understanding what, could be a potential deficiency in that area. And so I mentioned earlier, water, that's one that, the last couple of years, we've got a product now that goes in the water that contains those 4 minerals. And then we've got a couple other minerals as well in there, but it's another way to deliver those critical minerals to the deer through the water. So for states that can't use Mineral X, they can obviously supplement water, and minerals are naturally found in water. Maybe a gray area for some states as far as the regulations, but it is another tool that land managers and hunters can utilize to deliver minerals to their deer herd.
What do you think, Aaron, is, I heard you mention earlier about is it a potassium deficiency that drives a need for sodium intake?
Yeah. So Yeah, it's on during spring green up. The plants start having higher water
Right.
content and higher potassium content, and that naturally causes a sodium deficiency.
Okay. So
So
plant-
higher potassium.
So the way that I've heard that is like, why did deer come to salt licks? Generally, I've heard that said as just because of the water content that is in the plants, they need the sodium to process like that water, basically. Is that accurate, or is that just part of it?
Say that again.
Yes. So the way I've heard it described is like the reason that deer go to mineral licks is because there's so much water content in the food they're consuming that time of year that they need the sodium to basically process like that water intake. Is that true?
Yeah. Well, what happens is that, the plant's got higher water content and the potassium level goes up, and the potassium ends up kind of counteracting the effects of sodium in the body. So it creates a deficiency situation. And so when we see these deer, wanting to go to mineral licks or salt licks in the spring, it's because the plant is low. It's a period of time where that animal's lower in sodium. It's needing sodium.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's because the water content went up, which triggered the reaction of potassium going up.
Yep.
Got it.
Do you think, they obviously don't consciously know that. They don't know what's happening. But do you think that they feel a certain kind of way? Like, I guess, how would you describe that? Like, I feel hungry. Do you think they feel like
I need
I need sodium?
Well, it's interesting with livestock. We know that animals, we call it cafeteria feeding. An animal, if they're provided energy, protein, and let's say vitamin and minerals in 3 different piles, they'll balance their own diet. We obviously do that, in a complete feed. But deer are similar to livestock. They'll balance their own diet. They figure out what they need, and they're going to try to seek that out to meet their requirements.
Yeah, I mean, you always see them or refer to them as like a selective browser, like usually selecting for what they're able to indicate as the higher nutritional part of a plant, or in a food plot, the higher nutritional part of that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. We don't have that ability, right? It's not like, what's population of humans are like vitamin D deficient. It's not like we're right. It's not like we're seeking that out, or maybe we are and we don't know it.
I would assume like we feel the mood. Right? Like, I mean, most people that are vitamin D deficient are also usually somewhat depressed. They're having anxiety. Mm-hmm. We may not correlate those unless you know that you're vitamin D deficient. But I mean, there is a reaction to it.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah. Well, it's one thing to say, well, there's 3 piles and they can balance it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's even more amazing that they can, like, within a food plot, select.
Mm-hmm.
Where.
Yeah, and I don't know, Aaron, you probably know more than my initial thinking around that was that they've got some sort of selector ability between the essentially the sensory or from nose, mouth, taste esque to be able to detect what is the higher quality selection of forage.
Yeah, it's something we don't really understand really that well in animals, at all. Like that. Back on the potassium in the early spring green up, based on when the plants are growing, they're preferentially taking up the nutrients that they need to support that plant growth. And during, plant growth in the spring, sodium's not one of those nutrients that's being taken up as compared to potassium. And obviously it's got a higher water content because that plant's, rapidly growing. And so the plant is dictating the sodium that's available in that plant at the time of, in the spring months at that particular growing stage. And so that's what's honestly causing the sodium deficiency. I want to say it's competition, but it's not. It's really the plant's growth stage is dictating nutrients that it's taken up based on its growth stage. And consequently, sodium levels are lower in that plant. The deer need sodium as part of their requirement. And so they seek out
supplemental sources.
What about, so it's not necessarily like an either or. I guess they can have both, but and it would be my assumption that it's going to be, I have an assumption about this already. Do you think deer will choose, like they have taste, they can taste, they have taste preference.
Yep.
Do you think they'll choose taste over nutritional need? Like a case in point would be, are they going to walk through a food plot to get to a corn pile? I know what the answer is yes. And it's not that corn has no value. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What wins out? Yeah. Is it the palatability piece, or is it what they need to meet their requirements?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I honestly don't know what wins out. I mean, I think there's probably a time when they're going to probably preferential feed on something that's highly palatable, but at the end of the day, if they're going to try to meet the requirements, if
They got to survive. Yeah. I mean, because you've heard that in some of the like northern states with harsh winters where people put corn out and the deer starve to death still because it's not enough for all of the metabolic needs that they have during that time period. But if there was a lush soybean field right next to them, I guarantee they'd eat it because that would help them survive.
And they would still eat the corn because it tastes good.
Correct.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. And I think it's just like it's the controlled setting in a deer pen. Like if there's nothing in a deer pen, you just put 50 pounds of corn out every day. Guess what? They're going to eat the 50 pounds of corn. But over time, it's going to take a beating on them.
Can a deer live on corn alone?
No.
No?
Mm-mm. I don't
For
think
sure?
so. Mm-mm.
Pretty sure there's no nutritional value to corn for anyone.
Because it's still together when you poop it out, Nick? Or
No, it's a fact.
It would be like a supersize me type of a thing for.
Yeah.
It's like kind of human being live on McDonald's alone.
Obviously there's different variations, but I mean, if you look at it, it's fairly low in protein.
Yep.
Which obviously critical to have.
Yeah.
High in carbs.
Yeah.
So you've got that going for you, and then I would say fairly low in fat.
It'd be like eating
for the most
potatoes, right? Like if all you ate was a potato, could you live on just potatoes?
I would assume you.
I assume you could.
I don't know.
Yeah, you could. You're not going to die from potato consumption.
Yeah, at some point. I mean, if you depend solely on corn as your nutrition resource or potato, you're going to run into some type of deficiency.
Yeah.
Right. That doesn't meet a physiological need. So there'll be a consequence of it. Right.
So yeah, it might not
sure.
it might not directly kill you, but you're going to develop something that is.
Yeah, it's not going to be great.
It's comorbid. So let's tie back on the EHD thing, because I think that's an interesting conversation. Because you talk to a lot of people and they're like, found a bunch of deer, died of EHD. Aaron, in you're saying there, the majority of those deer obviously had or likely had some sort of EHD or blue tongue virus, but it's a comorbidity that's actually killing the deer.
Yeah, we've learned that from the captive deer industry, because they can do necropsies and those things. Whereas in the wild, we don't do necropsies other than field dress the deer, but we're not sending samples off for any type of diagnostics. But we've learned that on the captive deer side that these comorbidities exist with EHD virus. So like I said, Fusobacterium is usually associated with a lot of these EHD type deaths in captive pens. You see some E. coli and Clostridiums as well.
Yep.
And hence the reason why we started tackling some of these secondary pathogens, because we had good research behind some technologies that could help knock down some of those secondary pathogens. So it's not necessarily just attacking EHD virus with some of the health technologies, but really going after some of the secondary pathogens.
Mm-hmm.
No different than, I liken it to COVID, right?
Right.
COVID by itself may not kill you, but if you have a comorbidity, it could be, bad news.
Are a lot of those comorbidities pre-existing? Do we know? Because an EHD death is a pretty quick one, right?
It is. It would be, something that deer probably already have, right? They're dealing with, some type of E. coli or Clostridium or Fusobacterium, and then they get bit by a midge fly. And we know some of the deer survive, but we also know some, a high percentage of them die as well. So I think it depends, what that deer is dealing with. And that's not to say EHD by itself can't kill a deer. I'm sure it can, but when there's these other secondary pathogens involved, it just stacks the odds against them.
Well, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, especially if those comorbidities are addressable via nutrition.
Yeah.
In the same way, like with COVID, if the answer is like, hey, whatever, 80% of obese people die from COVID, let's fix the obesity, and you'll have a much lower mortality rate.
So we had the the first year that I got to experience DHD was 2007 at Mississippi State when we were running this epigenetics program, and which consequently the next year we actually were applying the EHD vaccine that you were talking about to those deer. But we would see a lot of the fusobacterium. We would see some of the clostridium issues. And in a lot of cases in those ones, it was in 2 to 4 month old type fawns that we were seeing that pop up. The one thing that maybe I'm thinking about it wrong, Aaron, is that we did a lot of necropsies on a lot of these deer. We would have a lot of issues around the spleen, or there was a lot of focus around the spleen. I think maybe for the EHD testing at that point in time. Does that sound accurate?
So you're mostly submitting spleen samples?
That's what, at least from the necropsies, it seems like that's what they were taking for a lot of the, in particularly like the 2 to 4 month old fawns that we were bringing in, I think was from like a fusobacterium issue.
So fusobacterium, a lot of times you find it in the liver.
Yeah.
And spleen, a lot of times. So for lab testing for EHD virus, you can use blood, or the spleen and lung are also internal tissues that are a lot of times tested.
There you go. So that makes sense. So that's why we were probably sending that. And then the next year we ended up using the vaccine, which I believe we gave twice during handling to the deer.
Yep.
So, yeah. And I mean, but it was, we had deer that made it through, that clearly had EHD that made it through, probably because they didn't have a comorbidity, right? They didn't look good, right? But they came out of it. But then we had a lot of deer that, one day they look good, the next day dead, and it's like,
well, I hadn't even heard until Lee was the first one that told me, like, a couple of weeks ago. He's like, well, yeah, there's a EHD vaccine. And I was like, what? Like,
yeah.
And so it sounded like the question or the application came about, dosing with wild herds.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, when we dosed them, we would process our deer usually twice a year. We would handle them. And so during those handlings, we'd give them other, antibiotics and stuff like that. But part of that was giving them the EHD vaccine. At least a lot of the fawns we gave them twice.
Well, so Aaron, how bullish are you guys with like your advertising towards EHD resiliency? Like, would you go so far as to say that analogics is a good preventative for EHD?
I think I probably would make that claim per se. I mean, we're attacking some of the secondary pathogens, and we've got good scientific proof of that. And specific to EHD virus, we've got some work done with EHD virus that we can definitely address it. But to say we're curing it, I think we're gonna get ourselves in trouble, because back to what we talked about earlier, in the wild deer populations, it's getting those animals to consume these products on a daily basis, right? And just getting enough intake into them to make a difference. That's our real challenge in a wild deer population. And you talk about the vaccine technology. Yeah, we've got an EHD vaccine. It's used in captive deer, as Jeremy's already indicated. So the question is how can we, from an innovation standpoint, where I get excited is how can we figure out to deliver EHD vaccine to wild deer?
That's what I was thinking.
That'd be the home run ball if we could figure that out. And so, that's an area that, we've been, fairly active in trying to understand how we can do that. Because like I said, if we can crack that code, that just opens up a huge door for us in terms of, land management and protecting the deer herd, because we lose a lot of deer. We talk about CWD, but CWD for me, guys, today it's an afterthought. EHD is on my mind all summer long.
Let me make sure I got this right. Is the EHD vaccine, it's pretty foolproof. Like it works. You give it, they don't die from EHD.
It depends on the strain that you have, but there's specific strains in that vaccine. And if you've got the correct strain in there and the animal, ends up getting EHD virus, and it's that particular strain of EHD virus, the vaccine is effective.
I think that's why we were pulling those spleen samples to ensure what the virus strain was to make sure that the vaccine we applied was correct.
Is it ingestible?
So oral delivery right now is not an option. It's all injectable right now.
Is it subcutaneous or was it intramuscular? I couldn't remember.
It's IM.
Yeah, it is. Okay.
What's IM?
So it's actually like for a lot of them, you'll actually lift the hide up and put the needle in and just shoot it under the hide between like the hide and essentially like skin.
Okay.
And then IM is intramuscular, so you're actually getting it into
so it does go
the meat.
intramuscular.
Yep. This one is.
Well, so that's a hurdle to begin with, right? It's not ingestible even.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that EHD vaccine, I mean, I think you mentioned this, Jeremy, it's given twice, and you usually give the first dose and then you follow up with the second dose about 3 weeks later.
So it's in a captive facility, it's feasible.
Yeah.
It's still risky. You don't want to have to handle your animals more than you need to, but there's certain times of the year you have to anyway.
To handle your animals, Nick?
Got to handle them, Nick.
But the problem you run into is there's like seven EHD virus subtypes.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. Because I've been out of that game for a while, right? I finished up there in 10, and at that time I think it was like an EHD 1 and 2, and maybe a blue tongue 1 or 2 at the time. Mm-hmm. And that was like, I think it was it. It was like those 3.
Yep.
Well, that certainly creates another hurdle. So because I know you can't do the vaccine itself, but the way Lee explained it to us, and maybe you can like set us straight on this, was that you guys have produced essential oils or have harnessed essential oils that have a similar effect, and that is in the analogics, product. Yep. So they are ingesting that, and it is helping.
Some of those essential oils are antiviral.
Gotcha.
For sure, and antibacterial, and the probiotics are more specific to enteric pathogens. Some of those I mentioned earlier, like E. coli and Fuso and Clostridium. It's really a combination of probiotics and essential oils where we're able to have an impact on the EHD virus either directly or indirectly.
Gotcha. And Aaron, just for clarity for us, because I think I don't know if we got to talk about which product are we looking at when we talk about
EHD, addressing EHD?
Yeah, having the essential oils and everything from, that secondary level to be able to feed. Is that custom? Is it off the shelf?
No, you can get it off the shelf. So you look for the TX4.
TX4.
We call it TX4.
Okay.
In our products that you'd find in box retail. And then we have, Lee talks about the Antishield base mix pellets. That's something you're not going to find at box retail today. That's more for your larger land managers and hunters.
Got it. And does that contain TX4 already in it?
It does. It does. And you ship that pellet into a feed mill, and then they add, the corn and soy to that pellet. That pellet contains everything that the deer needs as far as the vitamins, trace minerals, and then the health technologies that are part of TX4. It's all contained in that pellet. And so you add that to corn and soy, and you've got basically a complete diet. And that program would be very similar to buying supplement gold. Like you buy at a box retail store.
Gotcha. Okay.
Follow-up question. What is an essential oil? Technically, it's like one of those things where it's like, it's all ball bearings this day. Like, what is essential oils?
Yeah. So those are plant derived compounds. So, for example, like oregano, that's a plant that, if you extract the oil out of it, you got oregano oil. And those oils have their phytochemical compounds that can cause can be antimicrobial, antifungal, antibacterial. They're used in a lot of different applications besides the health arena, right? Some are there to improve digestion. We use some of them in livestock for that purpose. But a lot of different applications with these plant-based oils that have been they've been proven to have different functions and applications.
Wow. So that's all they are. An essential oil is just an oil derived from a plant.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And what you're looking for is an essential oil that mimics a chemical that is produced in a lab that you know the effect of?
Yeah. So, so for example, that's a good way to describe it. So we know antibiotics have antimicrobial activity, right? They work against bacteria. Essential oils are certain ones that also work against bacteria. They're just natural.
Yep.
And a lot of antibiotics they were produced, they were produced in nature, right? They were found in nature, and then somebody figures that out, and they're able to, synthesize them and do it on a commercial level, and it becomes an antibiotic. It goes through, a regulatory process to get approved as an antibiotic, and then it gets regulated. Essential oils are what we call GRAS status, generally recognized as safe because they're all natural. Yeah. And they're extracted. Some of them are some are natural oils, some of them are nature-like. So they're chemically they're very similar to the natural oil structure, and still have the same properties and function. But it just becomes a tool when you don't have the ability to utilize antibiotics. There's other compounds that are antibiotic-like.
HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Pure Wildlife Blends.
Yeah, buddy. We're doing a lot of food plots this year. It seems like the planning, the preparation, like the coordinating for getting everything, in the ground, it's like it just never ends.
Yeah, and I just got off an 18-hour bender where I'm on multiple farms getting everything ready. But this year, fortunately, we've got Pure Wildlife Blends, which is Jeff Sturgis. Who better to partner with for our food plot program than a guy who's got 30 years of experience, been on thousands of farms. I mean, the guy lives and breathes food plots.
Yeah, and so the blends themselves are all handpicked by Jeff, and it's like, man, we've had a lot of conversations with him over the years, and he's been pretty influential in how we set up farms and stuff. And frankly, the product, it's in a name. It's Pure Wildlife Blend. So a lot of these other seeds that you see that are blue and orange and all these things, it's because they're coated with lime and they're dyed, and it's marketing at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of confidence in the seeds that Jeff has chose, and that's what we're going to be planting this year. And so right now, you can use code HUNTR10 for 10% off anything on the website.
So if you're looking for switch, clover, brassica, or Jeff's favorite, layer in the rye.
Layer in the rye.
Yep. Check out purewildlifeblends.com.
So let me ask you this, and you have to give us a secret sauce to Analogics, but in areas where those plants that you're using to produce those amino acids exist naturally, are there lower prevalence rates of VHD? And what I mean is, can the deer just eat the plants and be naturally protected?
I think that's where it come back to like the palatability side. Like,
the problem is a lot of these essential oils that we're using.
They taste like shit.
They're not. They don't taste very well, and they're also they're not sourced in the U.S. They're not native to the U.S.
Gotcha. Can you tell us what kind of plants they are or no?
Oh yeah. So it won't tell you everything, but we use it's on the label, right? We've got to do it for feed labeling reasons from a regulatory standpoint, but we use there's essential oils like oregano oil in there. There's oils like cinnamaldehyde, capsaicin is also in there. The magic is really understanding the functionality of those individual essential oils, and then also being able to encapsulate those oils so you can get delivery to the targeted tissue or the targeted area.
Wow. So could you, and I understand palatability is maybe an issue, but like, could you plant those kind of plants in the United States and or I don't know, crossbreed them with a palatable plant?
That's a good question. I'm not sure on that. I don't know what,
need a botanist.
Some of these. Yeah, need a botanist on this one, but I assume in a greenhouse environment, right, where you can mimic those regions where they're grown already, and the soil types, you could probably do that. I just don't know, when you start looking at all those essential oils, what would be the kind of the agronomic requirements to grow those.
Well,
there's got to be, and we don't do it here. I mean, obviously, there's other things we grow better probably than some of these oils,
I would assume there's some sort of like concentration as well in that formula, right? Like, so it's not like you're just dash of this, dash of that. Like there's
leave it up to the deer.
It's a formulated piece. Yeah. I just think again, in that wild setting, they're just eating it,
Yeah.
a bunch of stuff.
there's different concentrations, we use. And the thing with essential oils too, I mean, we talked about the palatability, there's a dose response curve in these animals where you got to be really careful on how much you use, because it will impact intake either positively or negatively.
Yeah. So how does garlic tie into all this?
Hold on, before you guess garlic, let me jump in on this one, because we talk about I guess two things. We talk about the intake struggle of a wild deer, and then pair with that, I guess, trying to think how to describe this. So talk about the intake struggle of the wild deer. You pair with it this obviously this concentration and having it out there. I guess my thinking is, and okay, then tie in like the epigenetic side of it. Unlike a nutritional program where we need generations, how quickly are we seeing this intake of these formulas have a positive effect against EHD? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
So what we do know on some of these compounds, we like to get, like in the case of EHD virus, for example, usually that's going to hit us later in the summer months.
Right.
After drought conditions, we like to have people, if we're running into a year where we're going to have EHD, to have kind of the TX4 onboarded 60 days ahead of that time period.
Okay. I think that's a great, because here we are, this is dropping first week of June, Nick? First week of June, right? There are going to be people that are just sweating bullets already. And it's like, well, if you told me I had to put this in 8 months ago, I'm screwed, right, for this year. But 60 days, I've got, so I guess what I'm saying is, like, if you're in these vulnerable areas, and especially if, like,
why not?
That we know, like, the cues that are coming up for HD. It's like heavy rain in the spring, creating these mud flats. Then all of a sudden it dries out and it's hot as hell out.
It's
like it's coming, and it's like, even if, to your point, maybe I'm not going to get the every year epigenetic changes and stuff, but if every year for 90 to 120 days or whatever, I'm feeding TX4, like I'm covering my ass a little bit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the trick is how do you deliver it, right? I mean, that's where for me here in Missouri and the counties I'm at, that I have my farms in, I'm feeding, almost think of it's like a triangle. I've got a supplemental feeder when I've got supplemental feed going, then I've got a mineral site close by. Then also have protein blocks. So I've got multiple options for them to consume products with TX4 in it.
So that TX4 is in all of those products.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that seems. I mean, yeah, I think of even right now,
and it can go in water now as well.
Yeah. So we've got the product called Deer Oasis that's got the mineral in it, the 4 minerals, and so the plan, we're working on trying to get the TX4 into that product. One of the challenges we run into is solubility of some of those essential oils to get the solution. And so we're working through those formulations to try to get them in the water, so they're at least water miscible and at least suspend, even if they may not go perfectly in the solution. But but that's that's what we're working on.
Yeah, I guess that's where I'm thinking. Like, again, maybe it's like, well, I can't do supplemental feed. Well, if I can buy a mineral block or a feed block with
put it in your water hole.
Yeah, I mean, most people are putting out a mineral block where it's legal anyways, or multiple. I mean, think of how many we have out.
Yeah.
Right. And so if I had a TX4 block in those places, seems smart, right?
Well, for whatever reason, like in Ohio and in the Northeast, we have not gotten hit as hard.
When we get hit, we get smashed.
Not as hard though.
Oh yeah. When Greene County and Washington County here got hit in 2012, it was smoked.
Really?
I mean, the counties were smoked. I mean, guys were like, they're dead. Every one of them.
Really?
Yeah, we got it. When did I buy my farm? I got it in it was either 2018 or 2019 in Kentucky. I haven't had it since, but when I got it there, I mean, that's where the warden was like, yeah, we're still recovering from that. We got smoked.
Wow.
So, yeah, maybe it is an every 3 or 4 year thing, but when you get
we're fortunate. I'll knock on wood. Like at our place in Ohio, which is not far from here, hour and a half, 2 hours, there's been a handful that have died, but No, I mean, no significant events that I can recall.
I think the worst part about, let's say, your farm or even
and we're in cattle country.
Oh, yeah,
like there's mud. Yeah,
where we're at is we may not get it very often, but when we do get it,
you're vulnerable.
Smoked.
Yeah,
there's zero resistance to it. They're just gonna get torched.
We're gonna talk about a TX4 sponsorship after this, Aaron.
But you know, you see what I'm saying? Like they're just, whereas like in Starkville at Mississippi State, that was 2007 was the first time I really experienced it, but we had it 2 more times before I left there. But these deer are literally experiencing it every year in Mississippi and Alabama and Louisiana, like every year.
It is the worst feeling too, man. Just the helplessness of like, you know, we put so much stock, not just in the effort that we put into them, but literally mentally to be like, at least I can look forward to deer season. Maybe not, you know what I mean? Come late July or early September or August, early September, you know, it's like we saw it with Duncan, just the rug gets ripped out from under you. And it's like, well, I thought I was going to have a deer season here, but
it's gone.
It's gone.
Well, and so Aaron, I guess we're, you know, and I don't know if you guys are like advocating for this. Maybe it's in the future here, but you know, let's take a state like where you're at in Missouri and those CWD areas and stuff. You know, it's kind of a cost benefit relationship where it's like, okay, you can't do minerals because of CWD, but if I could do minerals and I could do the TX4 as the mineral, I'm fighting EHD, which could completely wipe something out this year. You see what I'm saying? Like there's, you know, and I get why they're doing it. We just had this conversation, but when there's a potential in that same spin, right? Like every cattle person in the CWD territory still has mineral out, right? Every single one of them, because it's not under the jurisdiction of the MDC or DNR or whoever it is. So there has to be a way to kind of look at that here at some point from a state side to say, okay, I understand this is mineral or this is feed or whatever. And again, maybe you just start with the mineral because it tends to be, for whatever reason, the lower hanging fruit that people don't feel as threatened about. But it's like, okay, I'm providing something that clearly is showing nutritional benefit and potentially preventing these EHD outbreaks in a localized area.
Well, it's an interesting conversation because it's like it's
the unrecognized disease from the bigger picture. Like I'm not, you know, CWD exists, it's there.
Well, but it's also like it's not chemical's not the right word, but it's the mineral, it's the nutritional benefit versus the behavioral.
Correct. Versus an attraction.
Shtick, you know?
Just purely an attraction.
Yeah.
And also on the CWD side, I mean, there's, you know, been some work done on like humic acid with CWD virus. And, you know, it affects how those prions fold.
I've been following that.
You know, as an example, you know, nutrition may be a way to not only address EHD, but could be a way to address, you know, CWD as well. And that's where I think, you know, government agencies need to be more open to some of these tools that we've worked on, whether it's in the captive industry or if it's, you know, like we have, and leveraging some of those experiences and know-how. It's just like here, you know, reading lately on CWD. You guys probably been following Oklahoma.
Yep.
With them looking at possibly leveraging CWD resistant genetics into the wild deer population, and some people are about ready to lose their minds.
Sounds like it's happening.
Yeah, and I don't know where that goes. I mean, I'll give credit to Oklahoma. I'm not saying it's the right answer, but at least it's an alternative path to what we've been doing across the landscape, because we spent millions and millions of dollars with programs on eradication, and I don't know we're moving the needle on really managing CWD. So I hope if anything comes out of it, because there's a lot of good research going on in that area as it relates to understanding CWD resistance. So hopefully it opens up more people working together, the state agencies working with some of the university researchers, and maybe using this as a tool to manage CWD beyond our traditional tools.
Well, so sounds like there's been a lot of pushback on it from the deer community.
Well, but we got some new information from, which will now be last week's podcast, in that, so what they're finding is this genome essentially that's whatever CWD resistant, right? It's not the deer can still get CWD. It just drags out the period basically that it it sheds prions.
You got pretty good knowledge on this, Aaron. You want to dive into this a little bit?
Yeah, I'm very. I mean, I know enough to be dangerous.
Perfect.
But,
We had
Jeremy and I. We probably can handle it. I think, but
it's Chris
no,
Seabury, right?
Well, so I was.
Yeah,
so Seabury is the guy. I was going to go with what Tonkovich said about, and I didn't know this before that podcast, is that I was under the impression that Seabury was basically formulating this around like the deer farming industry, as the portal, which is kind of how this is. However, per the last podcast, there are CWD researchers, Brian Richards being the guy, who are saying in areas that the prevalence doesn't exist, the genome doesn't exist, right? But in areas that the prevalence exists, aka like Wisconsin heavily, the genome exists naturally in wild deer. It is showing up now in those deer in these disease-stressed areas. Yep. So to Mike's point, and so far, and we'll listen to Chris's guy here in a little bit, it's not off the rocker, right? I mean, there is a wild factor here that's showing like, hey, this genome is whatever, the light switch is on at this point.
Tim Condict is the guy that we're considering having on. Do you know who that is?
Yeah, I know Tim. Yeah, he'd be a good one to have on. He's been very active with captive deer society.
So I talked with him on the phone for like an hour the other day, and he'll get a kick out of when he hears this. Highly controversial, or would be maybe a word for it, in that like has some pretty direct whatever you want to call them, accusations towards the NDA, RMF, whoever would be the organizations who accept grant money in an effort to do research, and basically saying that they are potentially overlooking an answer because of the money that's coming in. And I look at, in fairness, it sucks that politics and finances have to be a part of this, but I think Tim is on behalf of the farmers, the deer farmers in large, because there's a financial incentive there as well. So I'm trying to like weed through that to understand where Tim is coming from. And I don't know Tim well. We just talked on the phone there for the other day, but super interesting approach.
Yeah, you'll enjoy having him on. I mean, I look at what the captive serving industry has been doing to manage CWD, and take elk for example. I've got a good friend here in Missouri that's selecting for CWD resistant elk in his herd. I think it's L gene in elk, and but anyway, I mean, he's trying to produce genotypes with that resistance, just because CWD, it does create an opportunity. Maybe down the road to introduce some of those animals into the wild at some point, but also just for his own longevity,
sure.
Raising elk. He, first time he gets a CWD positive, he's going to have to euthanize his entire herd.
Yep.
And that's a
death sentence.
Yeah, it's a big economic loss when they have to do that. I mean, the animals are not insured. I mean, Tim can talk through all that. But it affects their economic viability. I mean, it's their livelihood. And so they're doing this to protect their source of income. And honestly, the fact that they can maybe introduce those into the wild later and work with state agencies, that's really secondary. But I think back to what I was saying earlier, I know people are up in arms over it, but I do applaud Oklahoma for at least looking at something different, an alternative. And hopefully they get to a middle ground with the state biologist on how to do this, and maybe pilot it, or leverage some of those learnings to do some surveillance testing, understand what percentage of the population has resistance already. Because I honestly get a little frustrated with here in Missouri when we get a CWD positive and we send sharpshooters in to kill them all.
Yeah.
There's already natural resistance in the herd. We don't know which ones we're killing.
I agree.
Well, I mean, that's
what I was saying earlier.
It was made clear from our last podcast with Mike that Jason, who's now the chief of MDC, Jason Sumners, those guys share a pretty similar view in that they believe that it should be lower populations and younger age classes to get through CWD. That's the head of Missouri Department of Conservation. Right. So, I mean, in response to that, sharpshooters are there to lower the population and likely, lower the age class as well.
Yeah, which I don't know. In my gut, it doesn't feel right to me.
Well, I think the big thing has been, and I'm going to try. I know Jason. I'm going to try to get Jason on too. Is that frankly, it's probably one of the reasons my wife left MDC, not because of it was just everything with CWD and it's a tough state. And it really was also because we were having kids. But the reality is it's probably one of the most, I don't know if I would call it aggressive or maybe it is aggressive states in their CWD management program. But with that said, I would say that, even being fairly in tune, and I'm sure, Aaron, you're really into with it being in the state, like, I feel like we're kind of light on, like, what are we finding here? Like, what's the result? Where are we going with this? To
compare it back to, like, maybe it's not apples to apples, but, like, the sharpshooting programs to CWD are societal shutdowns to COVID.
Sure.
Just shut it down. Like, in theory, like, let's make sure this can't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think undeniably you can look back at the consequences that we're still working through from the, shutdowns from COVID is like, it's a similar impact probably that you're going to have on on the deer hunting industry as far as CWD.
Well, and I mean, you're, don't share anything that you're not comfortable with, but, I think of COVID's a great example, and I hate being the apples to that, but
it's the same thing.
It is what it is. Yeah. The reality is that, the more healthy you were when you potentially contracted COVID, the less impact it had on you, right? Yep. I would assume from a nutritional side, this is where I'm taking this twist, is like if you look at it from the essential nutrients that these deer need to have, the overall health, like there has to be, and maybe it's not a complete preventative, but there has to be some ability that if that deer is in great condition and it has the nutrients.
Well, that's what he's saying. That's how they're addressing EHD, and that's why CWD is just an afterthought for Aaron.
Well, but I'm saying even for the CWD side, like, I mean, that there should be some correlation there, right? And again, I'm not saying that the deer is going to survive, but I'm just saying from a standpoint of maybe it takes longer to show those clinical signs or whatever it is.
That's a good question. With that being a prion disease, I mean, it can be different than maybe EHD virus that way.
Yeah.
Because of how it ends up, infecting the deer. It's a neurodegenerative disease, right?
Mm-hmm.
Caused from that prion and basically causes, holes in the brain. So, one logically could say if the deer are healthier, maybe it helps them with chronic wasting disease. We've not studied in great detail, CWD in terms of some of the comorbidities with it, just because EHD has been really our focus. I mean, like I said earlier, I mean, I personally don't know of a deer that's died to CWD, a wild deer.
Well, see, that's where I was going to go with that, Aaron. It's like, if that's the biggest question, EHD, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's honestly the frustrating part. And that's where I like to see some of the state biologists work with some of these researchers that have been very active.
Yeah.
Working with the captive industries and bringing those groups together and doing a mind share on how we can manage the CWD thing practically, because what we're doing today, I like to hear somebody tell me that it's working.
Well, that's
how do you measure success or failure?
Yeah.
How do you know it's working? No different than the pushback I'm hearing on what Oklahoma's doing. There's concerns that, problem could be made worse, but it also could be made better. So how are we going to measure success or failure? No matter what strategy we use, at least what I'm seeing with what Oklahoma's proposing, there's good science behind what they're proposing there. Mm-hmm. Yes, their risk, but that's
what is the risk? What is the pushback that they're getting?
It would be if you had a situation where you tested an animal for CWD resistant genes, and perhaps the accuracy of that testing wasn't 100%, and you end up slipping a CWD
positive,
positive animal or an animal with the wrong genotype into the population. But the CWD positives is what you'd be probably most concerned about. All right, slipping a CWD positive in there,
and I think there's an overall hunting ethics side of it that's probably twitching a little bit. I mean, nobody wants to see 2-year-old 200-inch deer running around.
Well,
farm raised deer.
If I have any opposition to it, it's the first part of it makes sense. It's like, man, if there is a gene that we can select for,
which there clearly is, because it's in the wild, they're seeing that response. It was confirmed on the last podcast.
You're a believer now.
Well, no, I got
Jeremy
excited.
and I were fighting about this.
I got excited for a brief second until Tonk said, well, like, they still get it and they still die, but it just is they may live 6 years instead of 4 or whatever it is.
So So I'm for that. I'm like, man, if they can naturally select for this, we can introduce that into a wild herd, then that seems like what's the negative there? Mm-hmm. I don't want anything that would come from, whatever. I don't want any other influence that would come from like a farm raised animal to into the herd. Even if that is bigger antlers, especially that. Yeah. I don't want that to be impacted.
Correct.
I just want that gene. I don't want any other unintended consequence.
Which, not trying to be like the negative Nancy, if you think about Texas and Oklahoma, those are the guys that are typically like, bigger, high fence, farming deer.
Yeah,
areas.
but it's not right. It's in the same way that's like, it's the opportunity misconception. It's in the same way that, like, I don't know, like if every woman you met had double D breasts, that wouldn't be that impressive anymore.
Go on.
You know what I mean? That would be just like, that's the norm. That's what you expect now.
We talk about that all the time, and I think we're at it right now where
double D breasts?
No, well, maybe. But there's insensitivity to, 170-inch buck in a lot of places, because it's like every time I'm on Facebook or Instagram or wherever, I just see them.
You're just talking about the social media phenomenon.
But you understand, it's same theory, though, in that, like, if all of a sudden every deer is a 2-year-old 200-inch deer, it's like, it's a big deal.
You erased the magic, because right now it takes something special to grow a big buck.
Correct.
Yeah, no, it's going to mess up. I mean, it's going to mess up the Boone and Crockett scoring system, right? It's going to introduce a bias because of where those deer have been selected for antler growth in captivity. Well, but also not every captive deer is 200 plus inches.
Right, exactly. Right?
So kind of goes both ways. But the concern on the testing, CWD testing, a lot of times, that's done after the animal's dead, but there are anti-mortem testing that can be done while the animal's alive. And I think what kind of the people that are opposed to this thing is they're concerned that with that testing, there's a risk of the false positive. So,
correct.
A deer could get infected, initially, and may not, because of the incubation period, and they may not show clinical signs or positivity, and you slip one of those animals into the wildlife that's CWD positive, then you just made the problem worse that way. But again, like I said, I just hope, this at least sparks collaboration between, universities that are doing this type of research and wildlife biologists to maybe take a more comprehensive approach to managing CWD as well as other, diseases in deer, EHD virus as an example. But again, I just challenge all these groups is how are we going to measure success or failure? Because that's the thing that bugs me the most here in Missouri is all I hear is when somebody has a positive, we're going in and killing a bunch of deer. It's, sounds good, right? We're trying to slow the spread.
No, it sounds terrible.
It sounds terrible, but from a disease management standpoint, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I think from a epidemiological standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. Slow the spread. We've heard that with COVID. And so this thing almost becomes I hate to say it becomes a political.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Everything does.
Well, I think that's Tim's stance, right? Is like it's kind of been a political vehicle for funding to organizations that may have been on life support without it.
Well, let me ask you this. And I understand there's like a virus. EHD is a virus, and then CWD is a prion disease. So if you're in favor of, or potentially saying, hey, there's maybe opportunity for genetic selecting to address the CWD concern, could that same remedy be applied for EHD?
I would think so. So we do that. There's the pig side. Not right now. There's a genetic company that is building has the ability currently to alter the genetics of the animal, gene editing, and basically make a disease-resistant animal for specific pathogens or viruses in this case. So the same thing can be done, in deer. if we wanted to go that route. But you look at the stuff that Dr. Seabury, has put together. I think he was predicting the prediction accuracy of those resistant animals was around 81%. So that's pretty good accuracy.
Sure.
So like I said, I mean, the breeding, the captive deer industry is leveraging some of these tools already, and it's how do we learn to leverage some of those things over in the wild populations and do it in a responsible, manner.
Yeah.
And I think that's the opportunity here that I hope it opens up in Oklahoma is, hey, doing what it's almost the definition of insanity. I feel like what we're doing to, we just keep doing the same thing over and over again,
Right.
expecting a different result. And here, this at least brings some new science to the table and could be another strategy.
Yeah. How does gene editing happen on? Can it happen on? Can you edit the genes of like a living animal, like in real time?
So, that area is called in pigs. It uses a CRISPR technology.
Yeah.
Some of that work was done at University of Missouri, actually, when they were doing a lot of that gene editing work with a genetic company where they were going after a virus in pigs called PRRS virus that's been around since the 90s. And so they've been able to do gene editing of pigs and insert those genes into animals and basically create disease resistance.
Yeah. And so that's basically a gene injection. It's an injection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
my understanding. That's not my expertise, but that's my understanding of it.
So there's something with that injection that can go, it can go and literally
alter your genes.
Yeah. I mean, dude, yeah. Imagine if you could, the fact that it's not consumptive seems like a big hurdle.
Well, and I think also
it's also not dosable in a wild herd. Those are the two things.
To Aaron's point, first of all, I hope they're going to do this thing in Oklahoma. It needs to be documented appropriately, and it needs to be communicated even better.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's the downfall of almost every other state is like communication breakdown, and like us as hunters have no idea what's happening, right? Maybe it is working, but nobody's telling us, right? Or if it isn't working, like what's next? Like, none of that stuff is communicated well. And I,
could you think Sumners could or would speak to that? Like, it's a pretty straight up question. Like, hey, what has been the result of all these mitigation efforts?
I'm sure it's out there for us to find.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I think
because that's the question.
They could talk on it. But I guess where I'm going on that is, so yes, obviously the consumptibility or how this could get applied is a hurdle. But with the Oklahoma stuff specifically, it's understanding what the result is. So, okay, we've got these, these genomes that are CWD resistant. We put them in. Like, now it's like, well, how many generations does it take to start to see that in an area? Because I think Tonk was the guy who said it based on what we're seeing in Wisconsin and stuff. It's like, man, almost the quicker you get CWD in the area, the more likely you see this genome flip on in these high prevalent areas. Mm-hmm. So it's like, let's say in Oklahoma, if I'm putting these deer into an area that doesn't necessarily have a high prevalence rate, again, I'm just hypothetically, I would assume that we don't see that genome flip on very quickly throughout that herd, even with deer having it in there. It seems almost like an environmental response.
I don't know if it's an on-off thing in that case, or if it's just having it or not having it.
No, I don't know. I mean, maybe. Yeah, that's a good point. The fact that we weren't seeing it in Wisconsin and now we are seeing it, is it because it's generationally?
Is that because it was off, or is that because it wasn't there?
I don't know.
I'd never even considered that until Aaron kind of mentioned it earlier.
Yeah,
as far as like those being expressed or not.
Yeah. So again, that's where I'm kind of like, is this an environmental suppressed thing? It doesn't need to be on because of there is no disease stress in the area, or is it literally a generational evolution type to adapt to it and start to have it? I don't know.
This is really taking me back to freshman year biology.
How'd you do?
I got an A. Of course.
It's a good question. I mean, from what I understand, the percentage of the animals that are CWD resistant in the wild populations is pretty low, right? It depends on what area you're in.
Exactly. So if you're in the high prevalence rates areas of Wisconsin, I don't know if I'd call it high, but it's becoming much more significant in terms of the numbers with it. Whereas if we went to where we're at, south of Pittsburgh, it's probably non-existent.
Yeah.
So, so I don't know. Like, is it just because it's subdued, because of the environment and the non-disease stress, essentially? Or is it, and I say that because I don't want people to get the hopes up too high in Oklahoma and that it becomes a generational thing, right? So it's like, 2 years from now, everybody's like, well, how many deer in the wild have this thing? It could be 20 years from now before we see if it's generational, because it's been 20 years in Wisconsin that this has been happening. So we don't know, but I trust.
We're so far over our heads in this conversation.
Yeah, but I trust those guys to hopefully, to Aaron's point, if they work all together well, which seems like what we've been calling for. It's like, I don't care what you think of the NDA. I don't care what you think of this university. I don't care what you think of this guy. If you all work together, because the common goal is we don't want all the deer dead. That's literally the one thing we all can agree on is like, we don't want them all to die.
Yeah.
These groups may be on opposite sides of the spectrum, but we all have a position of like, we want deer to continue to thrive, to be a resource. Mm-hmm. So if we all work together and we communicate well, we should have a very clear understanding of what this is going to do. And I mean, I kind of have to at least try to look at it as the worst. It's like, all right, what's the worst going to happen? You're going to introduce more CWD deer into the population? Like, they may already be there.
Calculated risk.
Yeah, I know. They're going to be there eventually.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it is. Like I said, the analogy I use, it's no different than us leveraging our experience in the livestock side and applying it over in the hunting industry for wild deer populations on nutrition and health. Yeah. The same thing here. Yeah. Let's leverage these university researchers that have been working with these captive herds.
Yes.
That really have a good understanding of CWD. Not to say that state biologists don't, but they've got more controlled environment in those captive pen situations.
Agree.
And there's a lot of smart people working on this in those.
There's a lot of money in there. That's what employs a lot of the smart people in it.
Put politics aside for a change and let's figure this thing out.
Because the flip side to it is there's a professor at West Virginia that I talked to that 100% believes in 20 years there will be no more deer. 100% believes it.
Mm-hmm.
20 years there will be no more
because
deer.
of CWD.
Because of CWD. They'll all be dead. And we can't, like, I assume none of us are willing to take that as an answer, right?
No.
Even if that is the destiny, like, in the meantime, we're going to try to figure some stuff out.
Yeah.
To make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But it's scary that there are, and he's not the only one, but there are a lot of professionals that have that doomsday outlook on this thing. So if that's the case, and I'm not saying it's whatever, just sea bear, there's got to be other things. Like, let's try some stuff. Let's see what happens.
Have there been species in the past that have been eradicated by disease? Has that ever happened?
Disease.
Asteroids with the dinosaurs.
Well, that's and that's definitely a fact. But that's
fact.
That's like a mechanical, physical.
What about the dodo bird? How did it get killed off? They just shoot them all or something?
I don't know.
I'll do some research quick.
Yeah, find that, Nick. I'm sure it's probably something like some fish or lizard or something that's more sensitive to environment, chemical.
Yeah, and I've heard about trees, like with a blight.
Yep.
So like maybe on a plant.
Yeah,
but I don't know if it's eradicated.
Woolly adelgid that is attacking a lot of our hemlocks it's killing them all. And eventually, if we don't slow it down, there will not be any hemlocks.
But it hasn't happened. Is what I'm saying. So.
No, it hasn't yet.
So that's okay. That's like CWD. What I want to know is, has a species of anything ever been completely eradicated because of a disease?
I don't know that answer. Again, you need a epidemiologist or something.
I'm going to pee real quick while we're researching that.
Yeah, I don't know.
About the dodo bird, though, they just got overhunted.
Everybody wanted a dodo bird on their wall.
But I think at least on the livestock side, I'm not aware of any diseases that have completely wiped out a population of animals. And the good news is usually science and innovation prevails, right? We figure out a new vaccine or a way to manage that health situation. And that's what the ask is here on CWD is, let's get the right people in the room, lock them in there, and they're not coming out till they figure out some solutions to deal with this. Because I mean, losing the entire deer herd in the U.S. in 20 years, that's scary to think about. I don't know if it's realistic. I'd bet on turkeys before deer.
Exactly, right?
Not have turkeys in 20 years before deer, but
well, I mean, I think the big thing there is it's the attention to the industry. So taking case in point, like a mad cow disease in UK and stuff like that. I mean, think of how much money and how fast and how many like of the brightest people in that spectrum were involved in that, because we weren't going to just let all the cows die in the world. Right.
That's right.
So, and that even having a more direct threat to humans,
the human health risk. Yeah.
Right. So there are those things, or think of like, I don't know, like did pigs actually die from the pig flu?
Pigs can die, the flu. Yeah.
Yeah.
For
So
sure.
like you think about these, livestock oriented diseases that had direct human health complication issues, and we squash most of them pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, again, and it's not to say that we haven't put resources into CWD. Clearly we have. There's been a lot of money spent on it. But, as of right now, there's no human health risk. Now, I think, what was it, Wisconsin, where the two guys both got Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease and died, and both of them supposedly ate a CWD positive deer recently before that. That was a big news story, I don't know, a few weeks ago, maybe. Odds are just weird coincidence, right? But that's the first alarm bell in a lot of people's heads of like, is this going to pose a human health complication?
Fear-mongering.
But here's the thing. In I know normally we relate that fear-mongering to being negative, to the point of what Aaron and I were just talking about with Mad Cow and some of these other things. It was a positive because it drew so much attention that they were like, we got to fix this. We're not going to let this affect the humans, and we're not going to lose cows.
Not the humans.
Right? So it's just, they jumped on it and resolved it.
Did we figure out, has any species ever been eradicated by disease?
The only one that I found for sure.
Don't say the woolly mammoth.
Please say Tyrannosaurus Rex.
It's some bird out of Hawaii called the
Hawaii.
The kakawahi.
Kakawahi?
Kakawahi.
That's what it says.
And
it was eradicated
disease?
by disease?
Yeah, that's what it says. Extinction due to disease spread by mosquitoes.
Oh, like a West Nile.
I guess so, yeah.
There you go. Possible. But again, I think that's where I guess I'm at in it, is that there probably could be a solution that is found with the right brains and the right money behind it. But I think, unfortunately, the broader based human race is going to have to feel threatened before that happens.
How about in humans? So what are the big ones? Black plague?
Like from a disease?
Yeah.
Yeah, plague.
What have been some of these viruses that are like...
Plague was giant. Okay. I don't know if that was the plague also like comorbidities though?
Yeah, very well could. You think about like Spanish flu and those things could have been comorbidities of when
exactly.
They hit. Yeah.
So were those things eventually solved by what? Why what? Or was it just kind of like time passed and?
Yeah, we were talking when you got up. I mean, you think about a lot of these things that have come up over time. Usually science has prevailed, right? Figured out a new vaccine technology or some way to manage the disease outbreak.
Polio, smallpox. Like you got vaccines for those.
Yeah. So, and I guess that's kind of the root of my question is like, are most of these like eventually biology just wins and like
science wins?
We overcome them, or is it we address them with science?
I think you address them with science. I would say. I don't think many of them just go away.
Well, I'm not saying they go away, but natural resiliency. You know what I mean? Like whether it's natural selection over long term or just human.
I think it's in our behavior to intervene. So I would assume we intervene before we let biology take its natural selection course.
Oh, for sure we do.
So
Yeah.
For better or worse in the case of northern Missouri.
There's also been a species of rats that went extinct.
Nobody
due
cares
to
about that.
Ratatouille.
Something from fleas.
From fleas.
Yeah.
Wow.
Christmas Island in the Pacific. Never even heard of it.
Sounds real.
Is that where Santa Claus lives?
I guess.
Christmas Island.
I don't know.
The land of magical toys or whatever. Misfit toys.
That's where he stays.
Yeah. Jeez. So yeah, I mean, I think that I do think science prevails in it. I don't have the doomsday outlook that some of these other guys have of like 20 years. There's no. I mean, that's depressing.
We gotta get Fauci on CWD, dude.
Yeah.
That dude's been missing.
We need this thing solved.
That dude's been missing for years. And
Yeah,
nobody's
where'd he
seen
go?
him. I don't know. Probably with Epstein.
I think what I've seen here lately, he's under investigation. So
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I do, although not the same. I mean, a lot of people relate this to the mad cow outbreak that happened, and that had human, health implications.
Mm.
Yep.
And,
It did.
Yeah.
Virus or prion in that case?
it's a prion.
Prion. Yeah. It literally is like a form of CWD or vice versa.
How was it addressed?
Yeah, so I mean that one was just through testing of the animals, right? So that there's really it brought about a lot of restrictions on transportation of animals and testing procedures, your ability to feed back certain products from ruminant animals back to other ruminants to prevent the spread. Probably another example would have been scabies, right?
Yep.
That's a disease in sheep. And they addressed that through basically genetics resistance.
Wow.
So that's why this CWD thing is. I guess that's the argument for it, is that this has been done in scabies or done in sheep.
Yep.
As it pertains to scabies.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the literature, when this was kind of all coming about in the 60s in Fort Collins, Colorado, the thought was that CWD essentially morphed from scabies in sheep because of the location of those animals before CWD was detected in the first cervids and muleys.
Well, I guess it's just never been, the reason it's so controversial is like it's never been applied to a wild herd, right?
That's right.
Correct. Yeah, and I mean, everything we're talking about, we talk about the mad cow, we talk about scabies, we're talking about domestic livestock.
Yep.
So again, human interaction and intervention is easier in a controlled setting like domestic livestock.
Mm-hmm. Well, it makes sense that it would be the white-tailed deer of any of the wild species, right? Like it's not domesticated by any sense, but it's the most.
Well, and don't leave out muleys. I mean, muleys are right now. Your muleys out west are getting more impacted than the whitetails anywhere else. Your muley
CWD.
populations are dwindling in a lot of states because of CWD, which in that point kind of goes against what Tonk and Jason Sumners were talking about of low population, younger age group. Though they are low populations. Now, maybe they're not younger age groups, but they have the low population checkbox. And they're, I think what we say, Wyoming and Montana, I mean, there's populations decreasing at 10% a year.
Interesting.
So it's a massive impact. We talk whitetails because whitetail's king, right? But muleys are going to be gone. Elk could be gone. You're talking about all cervids. There will be no more cervids. No moose, no elk, no muleys, no whitetail, no blacktail, no coos. Like all gone.
What kind of world is that?
A sad one.
Very sad one.
Imagine a world with
Yeah,
no
but-
whitetails.
No.
Yeah, for the listeners, I mean, scabies is a prion disease, and that affects sheep, and they have been able to reduce the prevalence through genetic testing and breeding programs. Again, it's in domestic livestock, but back to the principle we're talking about here of CWD resistant animals being introduced in the wild deer populations, it could be a tool.
And and
more to learn, but it could be a tool.
And it very likely will get worse before it gets better. Like it may take us to reduce cervid populations dramatically so that they're at a manageable level to basically do what we do to domestic livestock. The nice thing is most of these populations can rebound very quickly in the right environment. So, so maybe in some cases, like what those guys are saying, Tonk and Jason, about low populations isn't wrong, but that's why I asked him, I was like, is that a temporary thing? He's like, no, it's long term. Well, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, what's the point? Also, the age thing, they're like, well, we just need all deer to be 2 or 3 years and younger. I'm like, well, then what's the point of having them?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think ultimately it comes back to science can prevail here. We just have to have the right players in the game.
Follow the science.
Follow the science.
But what's really hard, I mean, there's back in 2018, there was a report out, and Tim may get into this when you have him on, but it was through, I just pulled it up here. It was National, I won't get this incorrect, but the American Cervid Alliance. They had 2 PhDs and 2 veterinarians really kind of go through the basic facts surrounding CWD. And what was interesting was that less than 1% of the million deer tested nationally over the last 20 years had CWD. So we're now, over time, I'm sure that numbers probably increase. I'm not seeing any recent numbers across the U.S., but we know 26 states, right?
Yeah.
Half the states in the U.S. have CWD positive animals, and the surveillance is increasing in those things.
Well, that's what I was going to say, Aaron. I mean, the reality is, and I don't necessarily know if it's worth spending more money on, but our surveillance numbers are pathetic in terms of comparison to deer populations and even deer harvest. In a lot of states we're surveying 1,500 deer, but we're killing 450,000 deer. And so it's just it's such, and I know because it's cost prohibitive to do, but I'm not saying we should spend more money on it. But the reality is like, it's probably out there a lot more. Like there's plenty of states that will say, well, we don't have it. No, you just haven't found it. It's there. You just haven't found it yet. It's just the reality of it.
And back to age structure, I mean, the thing I wrestle with too, we know that the, incubation period is 17 months to 4 years.
Yeah.
Right. And so the animal may be positive for it, but they may not die till later on in life. And with, at least here in Northeast Missouri, a lot of these animals don't make it.
Yeah, they don't make it to there.
Anyway, I mean.
Yeah, that's what.
So.
Yeah, I think a big, what I would love to see, and I guess it would tie into the increase of surveillance to counterproductive to what I just said, but it would be, I know a lot of us make the comment of like, we've never really seen a deer die from CWD, right? It would be interesting to see what the causes of death are, from a large portion of them, because of the way we test, is hunting mortality, right? That's almost the only way. There have been several states, Florida was one of them, where it was a roadkill. So deer vehicle collision, but again, because it's not pen, it's harder to, find a deer that just dies from it. The EHD thing, we're obviously finding them together usually and by water.
What is, do you think, the number one cause of mortality in deer? Is it hunting?
Yeah.
You think so?
Yep. By far.
By far. Yeah.
And what do you think is number 2? Car or vehicle?
Depending on where you're at. Deer vehicle in most of the East and Midwest. And out in the West Coast, it's probably disease followed by like some other form of natural mortality, brain abscess or something like that. Yeah. Predator in some cases.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you start to go up north now with Michigan and Wisconsin, winters and wolves.
Wolves, yeah.
Are way up.
But we're in agreement. So hunting for sure kills the most deer.
Yep. And there'll be, even with, a massive EHD outbreak in a state, but still hunting. But in those cases, like it's up there, maybe it's number 3, I'd still say deer vehicle is probably higher than it, but I don't know. Yeah. It just depends on how, spotty it is when it actually happens. Yeah. But, it's influxes too. But again, you go back to what we're talking about with like the TX4 side of things. It's like, if I could run, blocks or feed for 120 days and just know that I'm covering my own ass on it, like that's pretty smart.
Big deal.
If you can, if it's legal.
Yeah.
If it's not legal, I think those states should consider, or at least tell me why. The answer can't just be like, well, it's CWD. Can't be the answer.
It can't. Well, it could. That could be their answer for sure.
Sure, which needs to have a lot of discussion about it then.
Yeah.
Because I'm not saying that that's not a reason, but it's a cost-benefit relationship there.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Sever.
Well, one of the biggest things that we always talk about is what our arrow setups are. And this year we're shooting the Sever broadheads. I think we're both shooting the new 2-inch titanium broadhead. And so, we're huge proponents of expandables. And I know we've had this argument back and forth with people, but we're
right and you're wrong, and you just need to accept it.
We just want to have a giant wound that pumps out blood. That's the bottom line.
We build our arrow setups and shoot bows, to maximize penetration, and we shoot broadheads that are going to give us the best blood trails, the most hemorrhage possible. And so part of those setups is we're also shooting the Easton arrows here coming up pretty soon. So we've shot the Victory in the past, and there's all kind of great arrow shafts on the market, but we're looking for a whole system from broadhead to arrow components to the arrow shaft itself. And, the more we look at some of these Easton shafts and the components that go with them, that setup's going to be really deadly for us.
Yeah, I'm actually using the Easton traditional axis right now in my traditional setups for both my recurve and my longbow. I've got a 100-grain brass insert on those, and then obviously I'm using a fixed blade broadhead on those specific shafts.
Right on.
So, but yeah, our goal is always to be shooting the best broadhead that we think is going to be the most lethal for our setups. We've done plenty of research. We believe in the Sever broadheads, and we hope you would check them out at Sever Broadheads as well.
Well, let's just let's move on a little bit, just for Aaron's time and stuff. As far as what you guys are working on now, Aaron. I mean, is this? I'm sure this is a big part of it, but what is? Where are you guys going with analogics? I know you guys are a feed company, also addressing some of the health issues, some of the water stuff. Yeah, what are you guys looking forward to?
Yeah, we've got a seed line we released 3 years ago as well, and so the health area is certainly an area that we continue to put focus on of how do we deliver some of these key nutrients, particularly where there's regulations that don't allow us to use certain products in those states, and so figuring out ways to do that. I mean, futuristically, it'd be nice to, pie in the sky is, oral delivery of vaccines like EHD vaccine, or can we incorporate that into a food plot product that they would eat? I mean, that's, we've had those conversations. We've worked, been talking to some biotech companies, the ability to do that. That's not an easy task by any means to get some of those things pulled off. So we kind of got some short and long-term innovation opportunities, but here in the short term, water delivery is one that, you've seen us release Deer Oasis. Last year, for example, we had, hot, dry weather. I've got farms that are close to rivers that were in creeks that were drying up, and I did not want those deer going down into those areas where there's a bunch of mud. And so I started using a lot of watering systems, tanks.
Yep.
Try to keep those those deer from going to those mud holes.
Yep.
If I could just reduce the incidence of them going, the frequency at which they went to those mud holes, I thought I was doing something.
Yeah.
Plus I was able to deliver, some of those minerals that the deer need. So that's an area of interest just in terms of different nutrient delivery mechanisms. We're always looking at that, and also new health technologies that, generational type technologies to go with what we already have.
Yeah. Man, that's super interesting stuff. It's really, it gets the mind going to think about delivery, at least mine. It's just you range from everything from darting them to, or, some incorporation of drones to infusing with their diet and stuff. And it's, I don't know. It's an interesting field that you're in.
Yeah, no, I think the delivery mechanism piece is, because we've got the tools that can help the deer today from a herd health standpoint. It's just how do we get them delivered?
How do we get it in them? How do I get it in me?
Yeah, and consistently, with wild deer populations, the captive, it's a lot easier, but in these wild deer populations, it's, as you guys know, it's more difficult. Then you stack on state regulations on top of that. It just makes it more and more difficult.
And I really would like to see, and maybe you guys are doing it, but I know a lot of these research universities and stuff. I'd love to see more specific research done on like we talked about, like the micronutrients and the effects on deer, like really looking at that from a captive facility, herd based, to say, okay, if we did samples and, by most traits, they're deficient in XYZ, let's bring those back up and let's monitor weights and antler sizes and fertility and all these things. I think it would be really neat, knowing that it's logical because of what we see throughout other ruminants and things like that. But it'd be really neat to see what those data could actually look like from a support system side to, reconfirm. Because I think for a lot of guys, like our audience, Aaron, is going to listen to this and their head's going to be spinning, because it's like, man, I need to create water holes. I need to make sure these have these minerals. Do I take soil samples just to see what the minerals like? They're just going to be spinning on it. But the reality is most of them are, blue collar workers, or, and they've got a job and they've got a family and they've got a budget. And so it's, what is the best thing to do? Because they're all so much thinking of, it's the funniest thing, because I always tell people, and like when they're like, oh, you're a hunter, and they're not, and I was like, they don't realize how much we care about these animals, how much money we spend, how much time we spend, like literally, like, how much we care about these animals, especially on our own properties. And I think that's where this comes into play. It's like, okay, well, clearly if I can help a percentage of the deer on my property, if EHD comes through by having, a TX4 or something out, like, done, no brainer, right? And it's so
what's the starter package?
Yeah, that's where I'm at. Like, what can the guys reasonably say? Like, if they're on a budget and they're like, what can I do to, like, try to, help out the herd the best I can, this
Well, it's not
year?
even a hypothetical. What can we do to get started here?
Yeah. I mean, I always think about, my own farms of, I go back to the triad: food, water, and habitat, and always focus on what I'm limiting most in. But what you guys are talking about, what tools can I pull off the shelf that are economical, that are just do-its?
Yep.
That I need to be doing it. And, I go to mineral supplementation. If you can do mineral
Seems huge.
supplementation, it's a big deal, right? We know from our, liver diagnostics that certain areas that the animals are deficient in some of those key minerals that are really important for physiological function. So cover that gap. Make sure your deer have the right micronutrients that they need to grow antlers or nurse that fawn, which is your future generations. That would be a go-to. Another ones are, and that could be a combination of the granular mineral or mineral blocks. I like to use both. And I'll tell you why. What I do when I start a mineral site, I'll go out and start a new mineral site, and usually use 20 pounds of mineral, put in a 4-foot circle, and I'll throw a mineral block in there as well. The mineral blocks take a while to break down, but what that does is it allows me from going in there every time, refreshing that mineral every month. Yep. And that's an option, but I want to try to, in certain areas, I want to limit human intrusion. And so I let that mineral block break down and kind of replenish or freshen up that mineral site kind of naturally through Mother Nature, just through rainfall, breaking down that mineral block. Mm-hmm. So that's a trick I've used in the past. Protein blocks is another one, particularly right now, right? We're at a period of time where bucks are growing antlers, does are nursing fawns. They need higher protein. Providing some protein blocks as supplemental protein. Those would be, two of my go-tos. And then, in the winter months, if your budget allows it, back to kind of bridging the gap between winter and spring green up, I'll throw some supplemental feed at the deer.
Mm. And there's two options there, right? In the supplemental feed that you guys offer.
Yeah, you can do like supplement gold. That would be, go to your box retail store and you can get supplement gold. The other option, if you're feeding a lot of it during that period, we've got an Anashield base mix pellet that basically you send that to your feed mill, local feed mill, and then they can add corn and soybeans, roasted soybeans or soybean meal. We've got the diets that you can use. We'll provide those, and you feed that product versus, going to box retail. The thing about like supplement gold going to box retail, very convenient, right?
Yeah, it's right there.
It's right there. If you go the other route and you're feeding appreciable amounts of supplemental feed, you might want to consider the base mix pellet concept if you're feeding a lot of tonnage.
What's that ratio look like of your base mix to, like, I don't know, whatever they're going to mix with?
It goes in at a 10% inclusion level, so 200 pounds per ton.
Okay.
Of that base mix pellet, and then the rest is corn and soybeans or soybean meal.
Yep. That makes sense.
Combination of both.
And
Yeah.
all or some of those have I'm going to mess up
TX4.
the TX4. So if a guy was like, hey, my primary concern is EHD this year.
Look to the TX4 on the bag.
Yep.
And
get the mineral block out.
Any one
and
of
the
those that
protein
you
block
mentioned.
or the feed. All of them have it.
Okay.
Yeah. So the mineral product's called Mineral Dirt 180. It comes in a granular form and there's a block form, Mineral Dirt 180 in a block form. The supplemental feed that we have is Supplemental Gold. And then the protein blocks, there's various ones. There's some crush blocks, and there's the Analogics protein block. And that Analogics protein block is, my go-to because I've formulated them. It's a higher quality protein block.
You're a little biased.
Technologies. I'm biased toward it.
Tastes great.
I
just like the way it tastes.
If I'm already going to buy something, I'm going to try to buy the best.
Sure.
So, but that's the order I would go. I go mineral, then blocks, then supplemental feeding.
Yep.
Cool.
In terms of priorities of resources on
Well,
the nutrition side. Food plots is the other one, guys.
Sure.
That's one that to me goes part and parcel with some of those other things. But harder to deliver the health technologies through food plots, but it provides good nutrition. So if you want to deliver the health technologies, that's the route I'd go. And I'm using more water technologies as of late too. I think another way to, slide those in there. That is really economical.
Well, I was going to ask, is there I don't know, is it like, can you overdo it with like the water? So right now it's that water mixture is those 4 base micronutrients that does not have TX4 in it right now, currently. But I would assume there's some sort of ratio you're putting that into whatever your holding tank.
Yeah. So those 4 minerals, what we've done, I pretty much formulated those based on targeted water consumptions.
Got it.
If they would just drink consistently based on what we've estimated, it would provide the requirement for those 4 minerals. But we know they're going to get it from natural sources as well. So,
Sure.
If they do it all, they're going to be probably over their requirement. But again, it's supplemental mineral nutrition.
Okay.
Right. If they're not getting enough mineral, they can go to the water, or if it's not available in the plants or the soil, it's another way we can get it in them.
I suppose.
And again, diagnostics is part of this thing, right? Going in and, I'd encourage you, if you don't know where you're at currently and what you need, send some samples into us. Get some liver diagnostics. Know where your farm sets.
How is that like something we just buy online? The kit?
Yeah,
to send it.
We got an online kit. Yep, you can submit online, and
Cool.
we'll submit it and get the results back to you. It's pretty inexpensive.
Does it matter like buck doe size? Just
we've typically a doe or buck and multiple samples is always good from the same farm. Right?
Just have averages.
Get your application up. So if you're doing a doe management harvest, that is a really good opportunity to send in some samples.
Okay.
That way.
And it almost seems like I've never really thought about it but the water treatment, I guess, makes sense. Like, the water treatment doesn't have I can't remember. It's TX4. TX4.
Yeah.
Couldn't you just, because you can put them water holes in a strategic location to, just because of the water and its location, that they're going to prefer it over.
Absolutely.
So why not just drop drop one of the mineral blocks in there?
I assume it's from the soluble standpoint, right? Is that where
it's going to dissolve in that water,
The minerals we're using, it's a good question. Good comment. The minerals that we're using in like the Deer Oasis, they're water soluble minerals. The minerals that we're using like in the mineral block, they're not water soluble.
So they're going to sift at the bottom.
And there's a limited number of minerals that are water soluble. Yeah. So they'll just go right to the bottom.
Gotcha.
But we have had people with Deer Oasis, they can put it in tanks, they can put it in watering holes. We've had some people put it in larger bodies of water as well. So yeah, it's been kind of it's harder to do that when you have somebody ask you how much should we put in a pond.
Yeah,
how do you get good agitation and mix? I don't think it's not a good use of money to put it in a pond. But
it's funny that
it'd make you feel good. We'd be all about it. It's a lot of product. Yeah,
just pumping it in,
drop her in. It's
we'll just send you a semi-load of Deer Oasis. But No, it works best like with watering tanks. Honestly,
Yeah.
get good agitation and mix. That's how I've been doing it. Works really well that way.
It's funny, just the things that pop into your brain. Like, how come they don't make instead of a water hole, like a gerbil waterer? You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about?
They'd probably train them to take it.
Yeah.
Just like a giant bottle mounted to the tree.
Yeah, just fill it with Gatorade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just put a little little trend in there.
Oh yeah.
Huh? Little testosterone.
We didn't talk about that. Like, I'm sure it's illegal, but what about like not just supplementation, but like
Steroids.
You know what I mean? Like pumping your boys up.
I mean, they do it on the livestock side, right?
There's some growth hormones that are used in cattle. We don't use any in pigs or chickens, but yeah, there's been some of that used in other species.
Cue all the comments of just saying borrow Jared's.
You've definitely never put that in a wild herd. That's interesting.
No.
Are steroids ingestible?
You tell me about
proteins
it.
they're going to break down. I mean, yeah, they're not oral. I mean, you couldn't orally. I don't think they'd make it through the digestive system.
Did you ever see
I
the
don't
ripped
know.
kangaroo?
Yeah,
Was he actually on steroids? It was.
No, but it's just like a funny meme. It's like this giant
Yeah, I saw
kangaroo.
that.
I don't know about you guys. I mean, if they would work, I mean, they're anabolic. They'd increase, muscle cell size or whatever. But I'm kind of more interested in antlers. So if
Yeah.
they don't do anything with antlers, I don't
Just
care.
be no necks walking around.
You don't think it would do anything with?
Dude, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it makes everything.
I don't know if
bigger.
some of those deer could take it, man. They're already cutting off the circulation of their brain during the rut. It's like just gonna blow their head right off.
It's not
the
actually
top.
cutting circulation off.
That's
Though.
damn close. That's why they're just stupid.
It would be cool. I'd be into hunting just some beasts, like some
They're
freaking.
just standing there and they just pass out because it just cuts off the blood flow.
You ever see it in dodgeball? He's like, it's him wrestling the bull by the horn. That actually happened though.
So we've used some beta agonist in pigs, and it bulks them up. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not steroids, but it's a legal feed additive and works really well. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it would. And there's a cattle product that is used that's similar to that puts on more muscle.
Interesting.
Animals. So yeah,
And that would be legal or not to give to wild deer?
you can't do it in wild animals. So
Okay.
there's no-
Where do they draw
Right.
the Where do they draw the line with that? Is there like an approved supplement list for whitetail deer?
There is, yeah. I mean, there is there's feed regulations on by species on what you can feed and what you can't feed.
Is any of that
Sure.
stuff regulated by FDA?
It is.
It is.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, because that was when you talked about like the EHD vaccine and stuff. That was always the discussion. It's like, well, it's got to be FDA approved because it's going to go into a deer that somebody could consume,
Right.
and most of them are not.
Right.
Yeah. The feed side, yeah, it's regulated by FDA. So
Hmm.
there's a lot of restrictions on what we can put in.
Yeah.
And
Which is why staying all natural with things like the essential oils and stuff makes a lot of
Essential oil.
sense.
How'd you get so big, dude? Essential oils.
Essential oils. Yeah. Makes sense.
Cool.
Awesome, man. Well,
Thanks for sticking with us,
yeah,
dude.
we appreciate
I
that,
know
man.
you complimented Lee, so we talked for 3 hours. We're at 2.5 hours here. So
Pretty good. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm telling you, dude. People are
I
gonna
enjoy
be head spinning listening to this of like, what can we do?
It's a fun
and stuff.
conversation.
And
I applaud you guys. I've started tuning in your guys' podcast. I really like the educational pieces of it and some of the people you're bringing in. I mean, the Tim Condicks and the Lee Lukoskis, and it sounds like you're going to bring in some heavy hitters on the CWD side as well, or have already. I mean, that's all good stuff, and try to put this thing together and hopefully make us all better. I mean, that's the nice thing about our industry is just the educational opportunities right now and the platforms to make us all better.
yeah, I mean, that's the whole point of our podcast is we want to have really good discussions, and sure, they rabbit hole down different places, but the ultimate thing is we want discussions to be able to pull out these topics, and a lot of times it's just talking through them. Like we don't have a strategy. It's like, let's just start talking about this, and I don't know where it's going to go, but at the end of it, we all might say, hey, there's something there.
It's happened almost completely organically. It's like, this conversation leads to, just like our conversation with Lee led to this conversation. It's like when you're genuinely interested, it just kind of happens. So we've enjoyed it, and we've met some really cool people along the way. And there's a lot left to learn, that's for sure.
Perfect,
Yeah,
man.
well, keep up the good work, and yeah, thanks for having me on. If you guys need anything from me, just reach out. So hopefully we'll continue to cross paths in the future.
And awesome.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, head spinning. I mean, they're, and I don't know. We didn't really get into pricing, but you know, it is what it is. I'm sure the mineral blocks and protein blocks are probably relatively cheap.
I can tell you that.
Are they? Aren't they?
I don't think so. Well, for a feed program. I mean, if you want to, like,
Well, no, I'm not talking about feed. I'm talking like if I want to buy 10 mineral blocks.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sure it's reasonable.
$20 per block.
Per block, okay.
What's
like a trophy rock? $12 or $13? So it's a little more expensive.
It's like $20 too now.
Really?
Yep. Deer Oasis is $10.
Okay.
Which doesn't have it. The gold supplement is $24. So anyways, relatively, and I guess let's even say everything else hypothetically is the same as your other mineral blocks. Trophy rock, whatever, Jurassic rock, I forget. Lucky Buck, same. The fact that it's got this TX4 in it seems pretty smart, to at least through the summertime, to have out.
Oh yeah. Yeah, agreed.
Seems smart.
Seems like we got to get some.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, but understand, I'm glad he walked through like those micronutrients, because you always hear about this stuff and you're just like, I don't know. I mean, hell, the reality is I kind of giggled when he was saying, you know, like, oh, let's say it's like 35% salt. Dude, most of these blocks are like 97% salt that are being sold on the market. There's nothing else in them.
Yeah.
Which, again, there is a time of need for that. But the reality is you're not getting any of the other good stuff that they need. Phosphorus, calcium, you know, manganese.
Well, it's
selenium,
why are you
copper.
doing it? And you know, it's what's the reason? Why are you doing it? And I think that's tied to a belief that it's having an impact on antler growth, because most guys, I think it's frankly kind of fallen off. I think at one time guys did mineral sites because they thought it helped grow antlers.
I think they still do,
and it may or may not. I think anymore
it's not going to, and not within the year, likely,
it's not going to.
Unless they're
super
super deficient in some of those minerals. Maybe.
So, which leaves you with, why do they do it now? It's pictures. You know, guys want to get inventory during the summer.
Yep.
That's frankly, that's why I do it for the most part.
It's attraction.
But if I could pair that with a likelihood that my deer are going to be more resistant to EHD, then that's a no-brainer.
Well, and
I'm doing it already.
Even the other micronutrients, just from a health standpoint, would be maximized out. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that, I think that is a big thing, and refreshing also to have a guy on who works for a supplement feed company who's like, it ain't gonna happen overnight. You're not gonna feed this stuff this year and grow giant bucks.
Oh, yeah. Because
there's a lot of them that will tell you, you start feeding 20% protein by this fall, giants. No, ain't happening.
Right.
So that was very refreshing from what we typically hear in the industry.
Yeah.
So cool. No, it was awesome.
Who are some of those? I'm trying to think of one. One says bigger racks guaranteed.
Is that Big Time, you think?
I don't know. I can't remember. But yeah, you got to get a kick out of, like, it'll give you a bigger buck this year. Like that's the claim, you know.
It's not going to. No, and it's cool to see. How funny, Emily, well, she won't listen to this, but she'll be like, you butchered my entire master's project on this thing. That literally was
We got it. You're educated.
I got it.
We got it.
We got it. Feed them, get them to age. Yeah.
They get bigger.
Yeah.
Consensus is,
Consensus is, it's right. It's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So, anyways, we appreciate everyone listening to episode 185 of HUNTR Podcast with Aaron Gaines from Analogics. And we'll catch y'all next week.
Later.
Take me on down the